Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Mormonism Live. Hey, first off, hi, Bill. How you doing?
I'm doing great, RFM.
Good to hear it.
Great.
There was a series that dropped on YouTube this past week relating to Mormons and Mormonism. It's called An Inconvenient Faith. I think it's riffing off Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth. They riffed off it to make it an inconvenient faith, which is Mormonism, which I think is a very understated way of saying it, an inconvenient faith. And then we riffed off that a little bit more and came up with tonight's show title, An Inconvenient Fraud.
Yeah.
I want to tell you something, Bill. I really, really like the thumbnail for tonight's show. I think it is one of the best you've ever done, and you're just getting better and better.
There's a really handsome guy at the beginning of the program answering some question about the number of issues that you find in Mormonism when you go looking.
Oh, wait, you're in the show. You're in the Inconvenient Faith thing.
I am. I will put up on the stage. Let me do this. Let me grab this off, and I'm going to put that up. There's the thumbnail. These are some images that Jonathan Streeter created of you and me. These are pretty cool. I like that. The temple's in the background there. Moroni's on top. There's Mormonism Live. But
the truth is in there.
Yeah. But anyway, this will be a great show tonight. We're going to play some clips from this, have a good conversation. And I thought it was very well done. So I'm looking forward to this.
I'm glad that you did. I thought it was very professionally done. That was a great conversation. I've got certain comments to make. And not only you and I, and you were in it. By the way, I was kind of in it too, okay? I had an appearance like twice for seconds, no lines. But if you look real fast, you can see me there. What they're quoting is Carol Lynn Pearson, who's speaking on a show. I think it was RFM. I'm on there. I think Martine and Lila are also on there, but it's Carolyn that they're getting there. Okay, so we've got some other people in the house. There's Jim Bennett. Jim Bennett was on the show too, weren't you, Jim? Hello.
Hello. I'm frantically closing all of my browser windows because somehow I'm hearing this all. Can you
delayed?
Hear that?
Well, it's a good thing because who knows when your wife is going to walk in. While you're doing that, we got Colby Reddish, or Kolabi, who was not on the show but is here anyway because we value his insights. And then another person who was on the show and is here by special engagement. It's John Delan, everybody. Hey, it's John Delan. Can you imagine? John Delan was on the show, and he did a great job. And
we've got to keep meeting like this.
I think so. There were a couple of women that I asked to come on the show. One was Rebecca. She has a prior engagement with a family member, and she's taking care of stuff. Otherwise, she would be here, she says, and I'm sure that she would. She did give me a comment to read, which I will read when we're talking more about it. I'll probably lead off with it so I don't forget. So I was sort of on it, but not really. But Bill was really on it. Jim was really on it. John was really on it. And the rest of us have sort of watched it at least. So Jim and John, let me start with Rebecca, okay? I want to say what it is that she says about it. And I want to hear what you think about it and your experience. Not just, what you think about it, but what it was like doing this. Because I understand it was filmed about 6 years ago. Is that true? Before the pandemic? I know because I saw it in my feed and I texted it to Bill and I said, congratulations. And he's going, what are you talking about? He had no idea. It took him a while to remember that this had been done and that this is what I was congratulating him on. So let's see here. Where is Rebecca? Here we go. Here's what she says, okay? And she didn't watch the whole thing, but she watched some of it. Okay. I'm going to get here. My whole takeaway. By the way, the premise of this is to have people who are representing the church, but not representing the church, the apologists, say positive things about the church, have people who are not apologists and are more critical saying their view of things. And you're one of those, of course, John. And Jim, you're on the other side. And I think Bill was on the same side with John. But it's a nice discussion. There's no yelling. There's no catcalling. There's no horrible names or anything like that. But this occurs within the context of 9 episodes that deal with difficult issues in Mormonism. There's the Book of Mormon. There's the LGBTQ plus issue. That got 2 parts, by the way. Each part was, I think, under half an hour. So eminently watchable. eminently watchable. 9 episodes, each one under half an hour. There's one about polygamy, one about the Book of Mormon, one about personal revelation, one about fundamentalist, high demand religions. Okay, but here's what she says. My whole takeaway, this is Rebecca, my whole takeaway is it's a documentary saying, here's what I wish the church was. But it is being presented as a documentary showing here's what the church really is. Yeah, and the documentary certainly, the idea is that the people who are speaking on behalf of the church, okay, though not officially representing like you, Jim. I think you're the only one we have on the show tonight like that.
That I'm officially representing the church?
Well, that's the implication. Because you're speaking on behalf of the church. I know you're not.
Yes,
I know you're not. But the people who speak on behalf of the church are obviously speaking on behalf of the church in tension or against the people who are not speaking on behalf of the church. So you end up being saddled with this. And now after I've read what Rebecca has said, John, can we go to you? And then we'll go to Jim. Then we'll go to Cole. Then we'll go to Bill and Colby. How about that? John,
what do you want me to say?
Anything that you want to say about your thoughts about this process, how you got selected, if you think that's interesting, and what you thought of the final project.
Okay. All right. So this all began for me when I did that documentary called Believer on HBO back, I forget the year that came out, but it was after my excommunication. It was after I'd become friends with Tyler Glenn. It was during the time Tyler and I were spending a lot of time together, and we had that. So the documentary Believer was Dan Reynolds from Imagine Dragons, and Tyler Glenn and me and a few other people, lots of other people, doing a documentary about the LGBT Mormon suicide thing. And I went to Love Loud, which was this concert associated with Tyler and Dan Reynolds and Imagine Dragons and the Believer documentary. That was in Orem. And that's when I met Bob Reynolds. People should know that Robert Reynolds is the brother of Dan Reynolds, the lead singer for Imagine Dragons. And he's also the manager for the Killers, the rock group, the Killers. And he's just an entertainment lawyer, and he does a lot of other things too. Great guy. One of my favorite. What's that?
He directed this, right?
Yes.
I mean, yeah, I think Jim was involved in the direction. I think Robert was involved. I would guess one of the Turnbull brothers was involved a lot in this, and there were probably a lot of cooks in the kitchen. I don't know the backstory for sure, but I'd say Robert for sure was the head chief. And what happened was I met Robert, and great guy, lives in Vegas. And, you really need to know the Reynolds family, I think, to really understand this movie, because last I heard, there's like 9 or 10 or 11 members of the Reynolds family. The dad of the Reynolds family is this prominent Vegas attorney who's been there for a long, long time. This is a super close-knit family. And last I heard, Dan was the only member of the family that wasn't in the church anymore. But it's a family that is very committed to the church. And although Robert, not to speak for him, although Robert has his own views about the church and would probably not be considered, an ultra-Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox Mormon, he absolutely loves the church. And I would say probably feels like many people who leave the church would probably possibly be healthier or happier if they stayed in. Now, that's my impression of Robert Reynolds' views, but I do think he carried that bias into the movie, and I actually think that's fantastic, because this is a spoiler, I might agree with him as how I'm feeling in 2025. Not everyone, but many people might do better to stick around, and we could talk about that later. But
okay, John, are you saying that your impression of the documentary series taken as a whole, was it skewed toward the church?
Well, I wouldn't use those words. I would say Robert Reynolds had multiple goals. Jim might be able to speak to this more than me, but I was involved in this, I think, before Jim was, honestly.
Sure. Yeah.
And the vision that I heard was, number one, ex-Mormons and critics of the church are not getting fair treatment. They're not being respected. There isn't empathy. There's disrespect for the critical ex-Mormon point of view, and that's not good. That's number one. Number two is there's valid criticisms of Mormon church truth claims. They need to have a proper hearing. And then also I'd say a third thing is that there are credible ways to know all the truth claims and still stay and to have integrity doing it. I'd say that's the third point Robert feels and believes. And then the fourth would be many people who leave might be better off sticking around. And the best way that they're going to have a chance at even knowing that's a possibility is if they see and hear from role models who can articulate that. But the only way to do that with integrity is to allow the critics to be on and to give them a fair a chance to express their concerns. So Robert asked me to be in it. He asked Jeremy Reynolds to be in it. I think we were originally two of the first people he wanted on for sure. And then the idea was to get Bushman and Givens and Mason and all the others as well. So that's how it started. The Jeremy thing was recorded here in my studios with Jeremy and Bill. I was interviewed here with Rob. And I don't think it had vision to be a 6-year project. My sense is Robert did an initial run and edit, ran it by the same people, the same types of people that convinced Patrick Mason to kill his project with me doing kind of news. And that's why I mentioned the Turnbull guy. I'm not sure, but I get a sense that the same types of people that told Patrick Mason not to do a series with me expressed a lot of concerns with Robert. It gave Robert a lot of pause, and getting all those extra cooks in the kitchen maybe made this thing take a lot longer than it normally would have. But ultimately, he got Jim involved to help with the editing, and I just say I love Bob Reynolds. He's brilliant. He's a big heart. And I'm really proud to be associated with this. And I had a great experience working with Robert.
That's wonderful. I want to ask you this question again a different way, though, because there are lots and lots of people who are saying, oh, this is so much for the church, and other people saying this is so much against the church, you know?
No, it's not for or against the church. It's for nuanced. It's basically making an appeal for people to consider nuanced, liberal, progressive Mormonism, unorthodox Mormonism as a credible, viable path. And it's not saying it's wrong to leave, and it's not saying you should be Orthodox. It's saying before you leave, or if you've left, reconsider and consider nuanced progressive Mormonism as a viable option. That's how I would articulate it. Now, Jim, you know this way more than me. This is just my take.
No, your take is excellent, and I think that's very helpful, and I think it adds a great deal of credibility to what Robert was trying to do, to have you be able to articulate that, given your position with where you situate with the church. It's been really interesting to see the reaction. The only place I would push back is that none of the Turnbulls were involved in any of the editing or any of the decisions here. They did, or as far as I know, there was one. We went and presented an early cut of this at a Faith Matters conference, and this was years ago, and it was very different from what it is now, because initially this has gone through so many different iterations. This was originally planned to be a sort of 2-hour documentary, kind of in line with what Robert had done with Believer. There was some discussion about, can we shop this around? But then we realized it has no appeal to anybody outside of the Mormon space. And Robert has just funded this entirely as a labor of love, and it kind of focused on that. But we showed it at a Faith Matters conference, and Robert stopped the presentation about halfway through because it was very clear that nobody was enjoying it.
Really?
And I was sitting there just like, can we keep going? Because the good stuff is about to come up. And what came out of that was we had really, it wasn't that they were offended by the content, or they just said it's not, it was so dense. I mean, there was just so much information. It was, we wanted to get everybody to get all the exposition out of the way. So we presented all of the facts and data points about the Book of Mormon and about the Book of Abraham and about all this kind of stuff right there at the outset. And it was really kind of tedious, at least I'm going back and looking at it again. And we came away from that with, okay, what really resonates in this are the personal stories. And we can't just load this with data points or apologetic arguments. We need to just, it's not an apologetic piece in that we don't try to answer all the difficult questions. What we try to do is model how people confront all the difficult questions, which
That's
think
a good
is
way of putting it.
well, I think it's a far more effective way to do this too, because I mean, everybody has heard all of the standard apologetic arguments and all of the standard criticisms.
That's not true.
Well, maybe not. Maybe more people need to hear those. But
I'm doing my best, Jim.
I understand, and you're. I'm not going to go there.
I'm teasing you a little bit, Jim. I'm not trying to be.
No, that's fine. But the point is, the reason why I think this documentary works and is so resonant is that we made that decision that we were going to focus on stories and we were going to focus on people and we were going to focus on modeling rather than try to answer all the questions. And it's been very interesting to see the reactions. You've gotten, it's surprising to me that you go to Reddit, and this has dominated Mormon Reddit for the past several days, but been virtually ignored by the ex-Mormon Reddit. Because a lot of people who have left the church just don't really have any interest in this. And that kind of makes sense. This is not convinced to get people to come back to church. I spoke to Robert while I was in Argentina on the choir tour. And he said, look, we're not trying to convince people to stay, but we're not trying to convince people to leave either. We're saying, if you leave, we love you, we have empathy for you, and we need to treat people who leave with respect and kindness. And if you stay, here's how some other folks have done it. And if that's helpful to you, great. And if it's not helpful to you, that's great too.
Hey, Jim, can I, in RFM, I don't want to take over. Can I respond to Jim for just a second?
Sure.
Yeah, and then we'll throw it back to Bill.
Okay. So there's this comment, Orison Orchards 4251 wrote, no way, JD. There's no way the majority of former members would be happier had they stayed in an abusive, dishonest, malignant corporation. Do you really believe that? Really quickly, panel, is that what I said?
It
Yeah,
did
that's exactly what you said.
It did seem like you said that
Okay.
most people.
Those are the very words.
Well,
The very word.
so what I do believe is that Robert Reynolds believes that that there are many people who leave the church or who have left it who might end up being healthier and happier if they stayed in. Now, that's not a majority. I don't think any of us would know what that number or percentage would be, but I don't think I claimed that a majority of former members would be happier and healthier staying in the church. If I said that, I didn't mean to. And I also don't think Robert meant that either. I'm just saying, I think Robert believes that there is a number of people who would be healthier and happier staying as progressive Mormons than they would be leaving. And there's a number of ex-Mormons, whatever that 1%, I don't know, 10%, I have no idea. There is a percentage of ex-Mormons who might end up or have ended up healthier or happier if they had stayed in than if they had left. And so that's just me clarifying this majority thing. I did not mean to say. And I
don't
also
know
don't
if you
think
said majority. I didn't know that's the word you were focusing
okay.
on. So anyway, in order to try and not get mired down.
What's that?
Trying to avoid getting mired down in things that don't matter.
Okay.
Mainly because it doesn't make any difference who thinks what about it. It is what it is, right?
Yeah, yeah. The only other thing is I'm going to just disagree with Jim. I think he is respectful of people who leave, but my impression is that Robert believes that perhaps the most enlightened and smartest, healthiest path is to stay as a nuanced Mormon. And in that sense, I don't agree that Bob doesn't have a bias. I don't think, did I say Bob? I don't think, yeah. I think Robert does have a bias. I think he loves and respects people who leaves, but I think he thinks that too many people leave and that there's many people who would benefit by staying. And in that sense, I think the film does privilege that and have that as a goal to convince more people to stay than otherwise might leave.
Can I ask a question about that, John? So one of the things so I feel like I'm an outlier amongst the ex-Mormon crowd because I actually really liked this presentation. I texted Jim the night I watched it. I had a really favorable response to it because I think, and Jim, you spoke about this yesterday on Steve Planker's panel. I think I understood that the documentary was always going to pose or allow a completely different like cadre of people to give their position on these issues and how they've either reconciled or not reconciled with them. And I think it really succeeded in that goal. But to John, my question to you, John, would be, did you feel, regardless of Robert's bias, whatever it may be, do you feel like your position on the church was fairly represented? Like you had a chance in the final product to have your position fairly presented? That would be my question.
I would say not even close, but I'm not salty about it because I'm for me, the miracle is having Richard Bushman and Terrell Givens and Patrick Mason on the same product as John DeLynn, Jeremy Reynolds, and Bill Reel and Lindsay Hansen Park. To me, that's a miracle. And so like just having my face there with those other faces in a project that one person manages is like a miracle. So
did you feel like the end product like vilified the ex-Mormon position or the ex-Mormon viewpoint? Because, and the reason I ask that is the one thing, when you say it's a miracle, I agree with you. Like to have this level of crosstalk, I don't think I've ever seen an effort that does so earnestly, whether we agree with the take or not. And like, I'm going to eye roll at a lot of the apologetic takes we'll look at when we look at clips. But what I'm curious on is if you feel like it allowed for the ex-Mormon people in the episode. No. Okay.
I don't think it represented the truth claims adequately. And I don't think that I'm happy that it introduced them in multiple episodes, and some of the episodes were treated better than others. But yeah, like the Book of Mormon, I think the Book of Mormon historicity did not in any way give a fair, comprehensive, thoughtful treatment. But I think to Jim's point, I think they decided not to do that. I think that was intentional.
I would have been a better fit in the tedious version.
And it's not a bad thing to go to stories when the facts are going to crush you.
Can I jump in here, RFM?
Please. I was trying to get over to you.
So I'll say a couple things. One is that I did this in Vegas where I sat down for my portion. And Robert met me at a hotel there in Vegas. We had the conversation. You know, they get the cameras going. And I love Robert. Been to his home. I've hung out with him. He's the author of books. He's helped out with some church curriculum. He really is trying to make the church a better place. And he really does deserve our kudos for trying to do that. And I consider Robert a friend. My little hiccup, I don't know what your guys' experience was like, but when I was brought into the hotel room, and well, it's actually my hotel room, but when he came in and sets up the camera and we're recording, he dictated to me what lines he wanted me to say. And that's not how I work. Like I need to be asked a question and then I'll articulate my brain will come up with my own answer to the question. And I'm not an actor. I'm not going to read a script. And so it was really problematic. And I felt like it was a disaster. Now they got a couple sentences out of it that were useful. Great. But I really wished, and I don't know if you guys got told what to say, but I really wished I was allowed to have my authentic voice in the conversation. So I'll just say that. Then I'll say this to what John was saying
Bill,
earlier.
I'll just say that did happen to me a few times as well.
Yeah, and it ruined the whole thing. It basically made an hour and a half of 2 sentences that were useful because I couldn't just repeat what he was wanting me to say. It's just not how I roll. I needed to be able to answer the questions with the way my brain tells me to answer a question. And as you guys well know, I'll do fine at doing that. Now, in regards to what you said, John, is it 10%? Is it 1%? It sure as hell isn't 50%. My
Agreed.
Anecdotal evidence is that somewhere around 90% to 99% of people are happier when they step away from the faith. The people there, but we ought to honor the fact that there are a handful of people. There is a percentage of people whose lives go deeply off track because they didn't stay, and they wish like hell they could put the toothpaste back in the tube. I'll say that we ought to recognize that part of the reason why it's so hard for some to leave is because the church, at least in part, makes it hard to leave. It entangles itself into family relationships to the degree that if you step away, it in so many places, I'm sure we can point out the places where it says the opposite. That's great. But in dozens and dozens of places, it tells its members to look upon those who leave with distrust and disgust. So yes, it might be hard for a certain percentage of people, but that's, at least to some degree, and I would say a large degree, that's the church's own fault that that's the case. And then I'll also say too, that once someone inside their brain decides that Santa Claus isn't real, leprechauns aren't real, we can't expect that person to go back to belief. It's now impossible. The moment your brain tells you it's no longer true and you have enough evidence in your head that you can't go back, you can't go back. There's no putting the toothpaste back in the tube, because some people wish like hell they could and they can't.
Can I ask you a question about that first point you made, Bill, which is, I thought one of the things that I appreciated most about the series is I agree with you entirely that there's been a lot of rhetoric from apologists or from church leaders that do vilify ex-Mormons. And I felt like one of the most praiseworthy parts about this entire project is that it didn't do that. I felt like it did humanize that position a little bit more. Is that fair to say? Okay.
I think people on both sides, I heard Jim Bennett say it in that one of those episodes. Thomas McConkie spoke something that sort of hinted at that, but that whether someone stays or goes, for the honest seeker of truth, we ought to honor that they're the honest seeker of truth and that they just made the decision that was right for them based on what their brain told them to do.
Well, can I just jump in here quickly?
Yes, but can I ask this question first, Jim? I really want to hear what you have to say when you jump in, but I can't get over this scripting of a documentary that's presented as though you're talking to someone and getting their views. I mean, it sounds sinister to me. Maybe it's not as sinister as I'm envisioning it. Was this like, how much was this? Was this a whole script or was it just cue cards, Bill? And
Okay, can I address it from my perspective?
Yeah.
So Bill, one thing I want to make clear, I didn't say things I didn't feel good about. So I'm not saying that I just was a puppet that just said what he wanted. I had spent hours and hours and days in my memory brainstorming with Bob about the conceptualizing what this film could be, what this film might be. I would almost say I was a co-producer or co-director at the beginning, and at some point Bob decided to take it another direction without ever. It wasn't like, John, I'm leaving you, but it was clear that at some point he stopped really involving me in it, which I have no hard feelings about. But we had so many conversations that Bob kind of knew the nuanced views that I had. And so I think he came in having a vision for what he wanted said and what points he wanted the movie to make. And so he was reflecting back to me mostly things that he had already heard me said before, but things he thought would be refreshing. I really felt Bob wanted to use me as sort of like dispelling stereotypes about what people might think that I would normally say, and have me share in his movie some of the things that people would be surprised to hear that might be a little bit more affirming towards faith or towards church affiliation. But he wasn't trying to get me to be dishonest.
Right. So
he
not
wasn't trying to
necessarily
get me to say things I didn't believe. There were a few times where he wanted me to say certain things, and I wasn't able to quite say it the way he wanted. And that just made it awkward and uncomfortable. But overall, I don't feel like he was being deceitful in any way or dishonest.
Do you remember what any of those things were?
I do, at least in the case of John. I was not present when Bill was interviewed, and I wasn't present for John's early interviews. John, you sat down several times.
Yeah, I think so. A few times.
Several times. And the one I remember is we were talking about the family proclamation, and we were trying to get sort of expositional information about the background of the family proclamation. And I remember Robert asking you, can you cover this and how this happened and that sort of thing. There was never a moment, and again, Bill, I can't speak to your experience, but there was never a moment when I was present at any of the interviews where there was a script. There was never a script for this. And never did John, here's what I want you to say. That's not how this worked. In that one,
that is what he told me, though. I love Bob, and Robert knows exactly how I feel about things. And never did I feel like Robert was trying to get me to present a view different than what I hold.
Yeah.
I think he wanted certain lines in the documentary to come out, and he told me, instead of asking a question, and just setting it up, just tee it up, and we're all smart enough to articulate our points of view in a way that gets it across. But rather than do that, it was, can you say this? And he would say 2 sentences. And like John said, it was so awkward because I couldn't do it that way. That's just so unnatural. If John would have just asked, if Robert would have just asked the question, I think there would have been so much more usable material in what I said than saying you want certain lines and me not being able to produce those because it wasn't my authentic voice.
But you didn't experience any of that, Jim?
Personally, for my stuff? No. In fact,
I think that maybe he felt more comfortable with you from the side of the fence that you're coming from and what you were going to say.
I was present for, as soon as I came on board and he started filming more people, I was present for the majority of those interviews. Again, I was not there for Bill's, but a lot of them that were conducted in the Salt Lake area. I was present for those. I remember one instance with Bob Reese. I don't know if you remember Bob Reese in this, mm-hmm. But Bob Reese was sort of making this comparison between a letter from the church educational system changing the honor code and the CES letter. And Robert said, "Oh, can you say it this way?" Because he was trying to make the point and he was sort of rambling it. And I remember Robert saying, "Can you say that?" And I don't remember exactly what it is Robert wanted him to say. Mm-hmm. And he never said it. I mean, what's in there, there's something, he says something in there, and it's not nearly, I think, as concise as what Robert was asking him to say. It wasn't that Robert was saying, okay, here's the content. It's that Bob had already articulated a position, and Robert, for editing purposes, was saying, oh, it would be so much more helpful if you said it this way, which I think is a really far cry from, okay, here's the script, here's what we want you to say. I think Robert would be sort of aghast at the idea that anybody, that he was trying to get anybody to say anything they didn't believe.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And if I could say one other thing just really quickly, I hate documentaries because I'm a long form guy and I can say almost nothing briefly and shortly and punchy and to the point. To the extent that Robert was coaching me, I'm guessing it was because I'm too long-winded and he wanted to get me to say punchy things that were short and usable in a documentary. And it's not my skill to do that, as this show testifies.
And as the editor for a good chunk of the time, I can say how frustrating it was very often when somebody would give this a snippet in a very long answer that was wonderful and then wandered off. And, you end up, when you're watching a documentary very often, when you start to see B-roll, what's happening is that they're covering a cut. And it's not that the cut is changing the meaning of what's being said, but it's trying.
Right. When they flash to the interviewer for a second.
Yeah.
That's what you mean, the B-roll.
I mean, all of the criticism that everybody has offered here, I think, is entirely legitimate. And I think anybody that is trying to watch this for a takedown on the church is going to be disappointed. And I think Robert would be the first to admit where his biases are. I mean, this is not an objective piece of journalism. This is a labor of love from somebody with a vision of the church where they want a more inclusive church, and they want people who leave to be treated with empathy and respect. And to me, John, when I hear you talk about that, I know Robert was very concerned about what your reaction was, and I saw a comment you made on Reddit that he found very heartening. I found very heartening, which was somebody said, "Does John DeLynn know how you've used his?" The accusation was that we made you into an apologist, and your response was, "Look, is this perfect? No." And, it says, "But is this the best representation of post-Mormons from a faithful perspective? By a mile. There's nothing better out there."
That was very gracious of John. John, where is it you felt that you were maybe not represented as thoroughly and as accurately as what you were trying to get across? What was the issue?
Oh, I wouldn't say it was just me. I would just say I think when we conceptualized this, it was probably an episode. It was probably an hour episode per topic, and it would be a deep dive into was it Colby or Bill that said they would have liked the deep dive? Like, I think it would have been an hour on Book of Mormon historicity, an hour on polygamy, at least an hour on LGBT stuff instead of. So I just think the main criticisms of each of the topics that were addressed were very much abbreviated, not given full and thoughtful consideration. And then the apologetic responses were given disproportionately lengthy and comprehensive treatments. At least that's how my first thoughts at a response.
Okay.
And I think that's an absolutely fair criticism. The reality is, even with an hour on every single one of these topics, we're talking about topics that have been explored in encyclopedic length from multiple perspectives for decades. The idea that we're going to come to a single solid conclusion about the Book of Mormon in 20 minutes or even in an hour is that's just a really unrealistic approach to this. And so I think it's absolutely legitimate to say everything didn't get a fair hearing. I think it's absolutely legitimate to say that Robert's perspective sort of carried the day.
Okay, so it does skew Mormon.
Well,
I don't think progressive.
I don't know
it
why.
skews progressive Mormon.
I mean, I don't again, I think trying to separate the intent from the product is kind of a fool's errand. But the intent was not to skew Mormon. The intent was to show to show empathy and kindness and respect, essentially.
I'm sorry, Jim. I'm not trying to talk over you. Finish your thought.
No, well, I mean, I think that was the intent, and I think the fact that Robert himself is a believing member of the church, I don't think there's any way to really fully separate that from the final product. I mean, I think when you notice, well, there's some bias here. Well, of course there is. I mean, I think acknowledging that up front, even though that I don't think that was the intent. I don't think he set out to make an apologetic piece. I think he really did set out to be as inclusive as humanly possible. And I think he succeeded in that far beyond anybody else who has ever tried to do anything similar.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jim. That's just like the longest yes I've heard. And I've been asking questions for like 35 years as a lawyer. Both of you, John and Jim, I don't know why you don't want to just say yes. Excuse Mormon.
But
RFM, but anyway,
RFM, it's because to say Mormon, I think is inadequate. There's a difference between Orthodox Mormonism and unorthodox Mormonism. I don't think Jim is advocating for Orthodox I don't think Bob is advocating for Orthodox Mormonism. I think he's advocating for progressive, nuanced Mormonism, and that's different. That's a different animal completely.
Okay, well, going back to what Rebecca said, and we are going to get to these. We're going to get to these clips, honestly. But that could be a genuine criticism of this effort, is that Mormonism never shows up.
But
Mormonism never shows up, which leaves the viewer,
Orthodox Mormonism never shows up. Why won't you use the terms?
That's the Orthodox Mormons talking.
The Mormonism represented by the top leaders of the church. I mean, don't they, at the end of the day, really get to dictate what Mormonism is? Because they're the ones who get to send us packing. They're the ones who get to send us packing if we don't advocate the same Mormonism.
Clearly, that's what happened to you and me. But I do think there's a whole bunch of Mormons that don't march to the Brethren's tune.
Not exactly.
Well, I mean, as someone who is accused, when Jeremy Runnels responded to my CES letter reply,
mm-hmm.
The bulk of it was, the theme of it is that Jim Bennett is not defending Mormonism. Jim Bennett is defending Jim Bennett Mormonism. And he puts a little C, copyright. And I own that. That's absolutely true. And I would push back and say, everybody's version of their faith is unique to them.
I think that sounds nice, but
this doesn't represent Mormonism.
Jim, I don't think that's true at all. I know I hear it all the time, but 90% of active Mormons just believe what they're told by the prophet who's in office at the time.
And there's a line.
Very simple.
And there's a line, and as long as you word things in a soft way, you get to stay on that side of the line. And the moment you really say what you absolutely think, other kinds of things happen to you.
Sometimes.
So what's this? What does that mean? Are those like little meters?
Yeah, what is that?
Things going off like
that's Dikembe Mutombo.
What?
That's Dikembe.
I'm sorry, I've never seen him. I've heard
no.
on him.
It's no, RFM. No, Bill Real. I disagree.
No. Well, yes, because otherwise you'd have to have millions of different kinds of Mormonism, and frankly, it's just not that complex a religion to support that.
You do have millions of different Mormonism. I mean, the variations may not be extreme, and I mean, you may be right that 90% of them look very, very similar.
Be unnoticeable to the human eye.
Okay, listen, Bill and RFM, I think this is the most important conversation of all. Like, look at Judaism. There's not one Judaism. There's ultra-Orthodox Judaism. There's Hasidic Judaism. There's conservative Judaism. There's Reconstructionist Judaism. There's Reformed Judaism. And there's many, many others.
No, there's
Mormonism
5 so far.
is just young, and it is developing its own branches. But only Siths deal in absolutes, RFM.
Ooh.
That's an absolute.
Yeah, thank you. My attorney has responded on my behalf. That itself is an absolute. Padawan. Anyway, it's so good to have Colby on your side. I got to tell you. Here's what I want to do right now. What I want to do is let's just stop bickering, everybody, and let's start fighting. I want to look at these clips because my opinion is this. Okay, my opinion is that the cats who are representing the church, and by the way, I'm speaking mostly. This is just the face that comes up on each of the clips from this particular episode. But primarily, this is going to be Terrell Givens, and that's why I gave his name up there at the top. That's not Terrell Givens. He looks more like the
nice hair.
But this is what? He has shorter hair.
Hair, yeah.
Oh my gosh,
that's the best Terrell has ever looked.
So, okay, if I may, Terrell Givens, Unrealistic Expectations. Okay, these are all like less than a minute. Okay, but Terrell Givens and Patrick Mason. Those guys are defending the church, and they sink the church all on their own. If nobody else showed up in this entire video series and you just had these two guys talking, nobody would ever have any interest in joining this church. This is my opinion. And I have these clips, okay? This is the reason I took these clips. These are from the last 3 episodes where they get a lot of airtime. And Terrell Givens starts with this thing, and I'm watching it because I have watched all the episodes. I wanted to watch it before we did a show on it, obviously. And he said something that had my jaw on the floor. And I said, Carol did not just say that. And I rewound it, and damned if he didn't. So I recorded this thing, right? I made a clip out of it to save. And then I started doing the same thing. And Terrell Givens and Patrick Mason end up defending Mormonism in such a way as that they may as well be the critics themselves. So here's the first one, and I want to get your thoughts on good old Terrell Givens. Everybody listen to what Terrell Givens says about unrealistic expectations.
I think anybody for whom polygamy is not a problem is to some extent maybe a little bit morally oblivious. It should be disturbing that Joseph Smith married women without his wife's permission or knowledge, that he married underage girls. I don't think that any of those problems are or should be deal breakers. I think that it is most troubling to those who have unrealistic expectations about the nature of prophetic infallibility. Unfortunately.
What do you think there, Colby? Should that be a deal breaker?
Well, I think I can understand the argument, and I can understand, and I know Jim will probably talk about this. He said before publicly that the greatest false doctrine in the church is this idea of prophetic infallibility. However, I think my problem with the Terrell Givens approach is I don't understand when you're willing to make the compromises you need to adequately deal with the church's reality of its history, where the value proposition is. And what I mean by that is I don't understand why I would create this special exception and these special allowances for Joseph Smith that I would never allow anyone else in my life or any other institution to operate under. That's where I go with this pragmo nuanced approach, is I don't understand the value proposition of prophets that can teach things as doctrine that are the church today says are not doctrine. I don't understand that value proposition. That's where I go.
What do you think, Jim?
I have all the answers, and I'm going to keep them to myself.
Those are the ones that you won't be answering.
To go. Polygamy is, that's the one episode, I think, where there isn't an apologetic response that's satisfying to anybody. I mean, you watch that episode, and the end of it is just prophets are fallible. I mean, there's no real attempt. I mean, you have Terrell Givens there saying it shouldn't be deal breakers, and I think I don't know that I want to get into my personal ins and outs as how I've reconciled polygamy, because I haven't fully reconciled polygamy. I think his first comment there, that anybody that isn't troubled by polygamy is somewhat morally oblivious, is an absolutely true statement.
And then he goes on to prove that he's the morally oblivious one.
Well,
in the same breath.
To build on what Colby just said, I've actually written a book that I'm trying to get published. And the title of the book is Fallibility, a Love Story. That I think the way forward for the church is not only to acknowledge fallibility, acknowledge mistakes, but to embrace the reality that mistakes are the purpose of mortality. That we have a theology that involves the idea that we came here in order to learn from our mistakes.
That's why we have to
have
have
a theology that I think offers a way to be able to say, yeah, look how we messed up. And we should expect people to mess up. We should expect institutions to mess up, because that's the very purpose of mortality. So I would lean into it even further and to try to, it's always amazing to me when people are more willing to throw God under the bus than Joseph Smith or Brigham Young. You know, when people try to defend the priesthood ban, for instance.
Isn't that mostly leaders? I mean, members follow you're doing a thing that the leaders do, which is always blame the general.
No, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming the members.
All right. Do you agree that it's the LDS Church leaders that set up a paradigm by which you allow or don't allow what you just said. It's
You allow or don't allow what?
the leaders are the ones who set up they might use fallible over here, but they're the ones that set up a paradigm where they can't make the real mistakes. And they don't want to talk about the real mistakes. They don't want to acknowledge the real mistakes. They don't want to answer questions in real time on the real mistakes. They're the ones that have the rest of the church trying to defend them that way. It isn't the members' fault. It's the leaders' fault for creating that paradigm.
I wouldn't dispute that.
Is there a difference in your mind, Jim? And sorry, I'm not trying to one you here, but
that's fine.
Is there a difference in your mind between doctrinal inerrancy and infallibility? Because I feel like sometimes in these conversations, and that's where I guess I come back to this value proposition idea, because I don't understand if we open the door and deal with the reality, especially like the Lowry Nelson letter, to me is the prime example. Like when we have prophets teaching things as doctrine that the church today says, not only are they not doctrine, they are so foundational that in the race and the priesthood essay, they start by quoting from the Book of Mormon. And there's part of me that goes, okay, so what you're actually saying implicitly is that people who stood in your shoes for almost 200 years didn't understand the very basics of treating other people equally, because that's what the race and the priesthood essay says this is about, right? All are alike unto God, that quote from the Book of Mormon. Right. So I guess my question is there a difference between infallibility, which I feel like is often like the straw man of the critical position, like we expected prophets to be infallible, when I feel like, and to Bill's comment, what I really expected was doctrinal inerrancy, and I truly don't understand the value proposition without doctrinally inerrant prophets.
Yeah, the difference, RFM, I think you're the first person that pointed that out to me, because I've been using fallibility to include both. But I think, RFM, you're saying we're talking about inerrancy, not fallibility.
All matters of doctrine.
And if you go, for instance, to like the FAIR website, and you read about that, can prophets make mistakes? There's this whole paragraph about how prophets can be irritable and forget your birthday and have bad breath.
And that's the straw man. Exactly.
And that's the straw man. That's the Mott and Bailey sort of fallacy. Nobody's leaving the church because a prophet forgets your birthday. Or maybe although we have heard stories like they left the church because of cream.
Simon Ryder would like a word.
Yeah, Simon Ryder got his name misspelled. But the reality is people are talking about doctrinal inerrancy. And I include doctrinal inerrancy as part of fallibility when I talk about fallibility.
Jim, if the church is going to embrace doctrinal errancy, don't the LDS leaders at the top have to go first? Don't they have to really, truly come clean about all the mistakes that have been made?
Oh, John's shaking his head. No?
What do you think, John?
Yeah, so Colby, you said you don't want it to be 1-on-4. I think I'm more on, this is going to blow your mind. In a way, I'm more on Terrell Given's side.
It's that's why.
Than at least three of you. If I could just explain. First of all, I find polygamy repugnant, and I find Joseph Smith's practice of abusive, cult-like, Keith Raniere-like polygamy horrendously outrageous. So I am not a defender of Joseph Smith's polygamy, and he fails the basic character moral test for me. But I agree with Terrell Givens in the following sense. I have come to the conclusion that not everyone has a brain that belongs on a certain path. I think there's certain people that are, if you look at like Jonathan Haidt's spectrums of values, there are certain people that value truth and evidence and science more than other people value it. They value integrity or character more than other people value it. They value individuality more than other people value it. And they're more introverts possibly than a lot of other people. And people with brains like that are really don't have the brains for organized religion. And when given the full information and the social freedom, they're going to wash out and probably be happier. And that's pretty much what's happening, is the people with brains or with histories that don't align well with religion, they're washing out and for a large part are happier. I think the majority of humans are different than what I just expressed. I think the majority of humans value community over truth. They value spirituality over evidence and truth. They are they might be more extroverted than introverted. They value the group experience more than the sensitivities of various minority groups. And those people don't really care if a prophet was not only somewhat fallible, they don't care if he was extremely fallible. They don't care if the doctrines change. They just want a community, religious, spiritual, social experience that meets their needs, that aligns with their brains and with their worldview. And so in that sense, I think most Mormons don't care about prophetic infallibility or fallibility, and they don't care about doctrinal fallibility or infallibility. They just want to go to church on Sunday and meet people and have friendships and sing and have here's some morals, here's some ways to live, here's some good spiritual dopamine and oxytocin to help you get through your week, and here's some support if you're struggling financially, and here's some support raising your kids, and you don't have to figure it all out. I think that's how most humans are. And so in that sense, yes, it's the brethren's fault for setting up the expectation of prophetic infallibility. So that's true. Yes, Joseph Smith was a sexual predator, but I don't know of a successful religious movement that didn't start with some type of abusive charlatan. I'm not able to find one. Like pretty much all cults or religions start out.
Abusive charlatan?
What?
Well, that's what Christ means in
Jesus
Greek.
was an abusive charlatan?
Say it again.
Do you think Jesus was an abusive
Well,
charlatan?
the problem with Jesus is we don't really know if he started the thing that now people are following. Like we know there was some dude probably named Jesus who taught some stuff, but Christianity, as it's now instantiated, and there are tens of thousands of instantiations, I don't think any one of them is what Jesus, if he ever existed, actually started.
Back to what Gibbons said. Gibbons frames it as if polygamy isn't a deal breaker, as if it sits isolated in the room all by itself. And what Gibbons isn't telling the audience is, hey, folks, not only is polygamy in Mormonism, its early history, horrific. 14-year-old girls being manipulated, not getting sleep, being told they got to come back and have an answer within 24 hours or the gates of heaven are closed against them. Not only that, and it not just one person, but then you've got issues over here with the, whatever it is, Book of Abraham, you got issues over there with this, you got issues. What Terrell's not telling the audience is not only is polygamy a perfectly justifiable reason in Mormonism to step away, and that for some, it's the only choice they have because their moral barometer says they have to step away on early church history of polygamy, but that there's also another 1,000 issues right behind it that are also justifiably good reasons to walk away. And that once you have 1,000 reasons, again, some may stay, Jim, but for a lot of people who leave, it was just so overwhelming, the number of things that they had to try and reconcile, for which the apologetics had bad answers, that it wasn't even close. I mean, this documentary presents it like it's a scale and it's sort of even. And if you just stick with it, you can make it work. And there are some that can stick with it. But for, I would say, most people who dive deeply into the material, they end up stepping away because it's the only choice they had inside their brain was to do so.
Okay, so we're going to have to go to the next clip. I want to have my last say about this, okay, since I'm in charge, and it's one of the perks, all right? The thing that struck me about this is, first off, no, Terrell, it's a freaking deal breaker, okay? It's not a question of, what is unrealistic expectations of a prophet? These are the expectations I have of everybody that you don't go marrying other women behind your wife's back. It's not like, oh, just a prophet shouldn't do that. Nobody should be doing this.
And you don't manipulate children into intimate relationships.
Right.
Okay,
And the more you
before
talk
you-
about it, the worse it
Before you
gets.
leave here, I
Absolutely.
just want to very quickly respond to this to the extent to say that one of the goals of this documentary
Mhm.
was to say that, Bill, if you feel like you need to leave because your moral barometer is telling you you need to leave, then those who stay need to respect your moral decision and allow you to leave with dignity. And I think that's the thing that sets this apart from so much. So when you start saying this is such an apologetic thing, again, all of
I think
this
he's just talking about
polygamy
Terrell
is
in that
such-
clip, right, Bill? Are you just talking about Terrell in the clip?
I'm talking about Terrell in the clip, but I just want to say, Jim and I, sometimes we butt heads. I'm definitely aggressive. I'm sorry. But I love that even as I'm bumping into Jim the way I am, Jim steps forward and he goes, and we need to respect the Bill Reels as they leave for their moral reasons or whatever. So thank you. I just want to say you're the kind of person, and again, you're in it for that reason, but you're the kind of person that Robert wants to capture here and say, let's at least honor that people stay and go for good reasons.
That was very,
and
very.
I don't want to downplay how important that is, because that's an element of this conversation that is usually lost on both sides, really.
And yet, in this clip from Terrell Givens,
each other, we don't know how to treat each other kindly. We don't know how to respect each other. And this is a tentative. I mean, it's not the end of the document, end of the destination, but it's a tentative step in the right direction.
then I'll conclude this part with my observation that Terrell Givens nevertheless says that people who leave because of Joseph Smith's polygamy have unrealistic expectations. So it's their fault. Not the guy who's out marrying all these women and kids behind his wife's back.
Well, and Terrell Givens represents Terrell Givens.
Mm-hmm.
But
I
he's representing the
don't
church
think
in this.
religions.
He's
I don't.
representing the church in this. He's representing Mormonism.
Well, that Terrell Givens is representing his interpretation of Mormonism. Yes,
I know, but he's the one on your side, Jim. I mean,
Well-
I think he's right. I think that setting up a religion, only a crazy person would do it. Only a narcissistic person would do it. Only a power hungry person would do it. And then once you start getting power, you have to claim that you have supernatural powers, which is way too much power to begin with. And then all of a sudden people think that you talk to God and have the power of God. Abuses are going to happen. Find me a significant church that wasn't started by no one and the person never existed, or the person was a fraud or a charlatan or was some way abusive. I just don't know any other movement that I just don't know any other type of founder of a church or religion.
well, I don't know that, I mean, I'm sure that there are many exceptions to that of people who are just actually well-intentioned.
Who are
founder of-
successful? Who are
What?
successful?
Well,
Name
Jehovah's
one.
Witnesses are on the par with Mormons. You've got Charles Taze Russell in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. I don't think he was.
At a
Thinking
minimum, they're
everything that moves.
frauds. At a minimum, they're saying they have powers that they don't. At a minimum.
Well, he's
Or they're
he's
delusional.
interpreting the Bible.
They're either delusional, a fraud, or abusive. Find me one, or they didn't exist.
Charles
There's
Taze
my John
Russell.
DeLynn test. Find me
Alexander
someone who
Campbell.
started a religion that existed, wasn't a fraud, who wasn't abusive, or who wasn't delusional. I bet you can't find it.
Alexander
L.
Campbell.
Ron Hubbard.
A successful religion, one that got big, one that was meaningful,
Well, how big is big?
big enough that we're talking about it.
Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventists.
I don't know. I think the Jehovah's Witnesses are I don't know. Well, I mean, they kept claiming, Jehovah's Witnesses kept claiming that they knew when the second coming was going to happen, and they kept
were
getting
wrong.
it wrong.
They admitted it.
Yeah, but I don't think they really believed that they knew when the second coming was coming.
Well, of course they did. That's why they published it and made asses out of themselves.
No, multiple times.
Really big asses.
I don't know that I'm right. I'm brainstorming here. I think Terrell's right. Only crazy, narcissistic, abusive people start large successful religions.
I
And
don't
prove
think
me
that's
wrong.
exactly
Maybe I'm
what
wrong.
he said, though.
What?
I don't think that's what Terrell said.
Well, I think
I mean,
it
you're
is.
agreeing with
I think
something that I'm
he's
not
just
sure he
saying
said.
it. Terrell's saying it in a way to maintain credibility and capital with the people that writes his paycheck.
Okay. Well, I tell you what, let's go to the next clip, okay? Because we've got a few more clips to get through. I'm glad I didn't make a whole lot of them. There's like 8. And then the 9th one is Jim Bennett, when you will be
When I
on the
will
hot
have
seat
to
again.
face my reckoning.
Yes, you must. At the hands of Kolabi. Okay, here's the segment now. Patrick Mason gets involved. He's not quite as offensive as Terrell Givens, but he tries really hard. He says Joseph's polygamy, okay. And you know why? Because other people in the Bible did bad stuff too, especially that Abraham, because he lied about his wife.
He called people like Moses, who had killed a guy. He called a guy like Noah, who was a drunk. Abraham, who lied about his wife. These were the kinds of characters that are the pillars of biblical faith. And part of the story is that God can call anybody to accomplish his work. I don't rejoice in Joseph Smith's character failings any more than I do anybody else, but it reminds me that God is pretty great and that he can work through people like Joseph Smith, and he can work through people like me, and he can work through ordinary people.
And according to that argument, he can work through people like Charles Manson. What do you think about that, Bill?
People like Patrick Mason, God never works through to start a church. To John's point, exactly what Patrick said. Even the characters of the Old Testament who we claim are prophets could have just as easily been delusional, unhealthy, egoic human beings who wanted power, sex, influence, and money. There isn't an example of a really good guy creating a really good religion and really behaving himself.
Okay. By the way, a show of hands, who here is or has been married? Okay, so any of you here, by a show of hands, who never lied about your wife?
Never lied about her?
Yeah.
Any of you willing to publicly raise your hand and say so?
Any of you ever lied about your? Of course, every husband has to lie about.
I don't know
his wife.
what
It's in the
I would
job
be
description.
lying about her about. What, like?
You know, if she looks, good in that dress or whatever it might be.
Well, that's different from lying about her or lying to her.
So you do admit, you do say that you do lie to your wife, Jim.
There is no right answer to the question, does this dress make me look fat? There is no right answer.
And you'll pay
Absolutely.
you'll pay a price for any answer you give.
And it's so bad because we know what the backdrop is. It's Joseph Smith and his freaking polygamy and how awful it is on level after level after level. And here you've got poor Patrick Mason, choir boy Mason, the Jinja, trying to compare that to a guy lying about his wife. Well, Abraham lied about his wife. Technically, he said, "Hey, my sister, so please don't kill me." Okay,
Well,
that's the big lie. And he's trying to compare that to polygamy.
I don't know if this made this into the final doc. I think it did. We have David Bokovoy talking about the fact. So it's in there where he talks about the fact that we make a huge mistake when we hold up the Old Testament patriarchs as paragons of morality. That Jacob particularly was kind of a terrible guy all over the place.
But how is that in any way something more than a tu quoque fallacy in saying it's okay for Joseph Smith to do horrible stuff because guys in the Bible did bad stuff too?
Well, I think if that's where the argument ends, then I think you're absolutely right. But I think, talking about the whole idea of fallibility, one of the things that one of my lines is I always say that agency and infallibility cannot coexist. That in order for a leader to be inerrant and not just infallible and have bad breath, or fallible and have bad breath, but at some point their agency has to be extracted from them. And I get very I roll my eyes when people start saying, well, do they talk as a prophet or they talk as a man?
But
because they're always talking as men.
But Jim, for them to be inerrant, for them to be doctrinally inerrant, if they're in touch with God, don't they just have to follow the commandments and do what they say is important to do?
If
Well, yeah,
that's the case, then there isn't a biblical model or any prophetic model that followed that model.
Well, then why don't they?
I think that's exactly my point about the value proposition. Like President
Hmm.
Nelson literally said, prophets always teach the truth. So,
And that was a lie in and of itself.
yeah, it is a lie or it's a mistake or whatever you want to call it.
There's
Lying
a
to
big
me
difference between a mistake and a lie, though. I think
there
that's
is. There's a
important.
big difference in intention. And I don't necessarily think that he has the intention to lie, but the truth is the end result is exactly the same. People are receiving information, taking it on authority and acting on it. So this is again where I come back to this value proposition of I don't really understand if the idea is, I mean, I can find a certain level of beauty in this idea of like we're all part of the body of Christ that's talked about in the New Testament, and we try and we fail and we do it together. The problem I have, and I think this even kind of responds to John's comments on the last clip, is I still don't understand the value proposition of that. That isn't what I was taught. That definitely isn't what Joseph Smith pitches in his first vision, where he's putting into the mouth of Christ all of the professors of these other creeds, and their creeds are all corrupt. They've all gone away. So I don't understand the pitch of this was a restoration of the lost church, and now it's just kind of like we're going to treat it the same or hold it to the same like moral and ethical and disclosure standards as like a Rotary Club or anything else. Like I maybe could get on board with that. That's the weird thing, but I don't think that's reflected in the way the church represents itself. It's not like they go in and teach the first lesson to people. All of us who serve missions went in and taught the first lesson and said, and guess what? God's called a prophet today. And sometimes he's going to give you good counsel. And sometimes he's going to give you really obviously bad counsel that contradicts our foundational book of scripture. I just don't understand that value proposition. Sorry.
Let the record reflect that Jim is laughing.
Well, that would make a really fun first discussion.
He's a good sport, Jim.
Well, of course we can't
can
say
I
that
pause
because that's
before
not the church. That's the real church. The church is that the prophet talks to God, God talks to the prophet, he communicates with him, and then the prophet tells the people what God wants them to be. That's Mormonism. You may have been out of it so long, John, that you don't recognize this anymore. Isn't this what you taught people on your mission, John?
I just want to delegate to John DeLynn to answer these because I think he's answering them better than
I don't think RFM wants to hear my point of view.
Yeah.
Oh, I do. That's why I have you on the show. And I'm
okay. All right. Here's my point of view. I'm reading John Turner's biography on Joseph Smith, and I'm reading Fawn Brody's No Man Knows My History, and I've come to a conclusion. A prophet is not someone who teaches an eternal, unchanging truth. A prophet is not someone who speaks to God. A prophet is not someone who's an upstanding moral character. A prophet is nothing more than someone who teaches a bunch of stuff that inspires people, that ends up creating a community of people that enjoy being together and that have a great experience together overall, and that endures multi-generational. And they're going to be super flawed. They're going to change what they teach. They're going to make all sorts of claims that aren't true. But what makes them a prophet is they inspire people. It forms a community that endures and that honors them and tries their best to follow them as much as they can once the prophet's died. And they're still going to change it beyond what the prophet taught.
But you would agree with me that that is not what the LDS Church teaches a prophet is.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. A prophet is not someone who's consistent. They're not someone who even tells the truth. They're not someone who lives a moral, upstanding life. They're people who create a community and a spiritual experience and a set of teachings that inspire people, that build cohesion, and that allows that community to endure and hopefully grow across multiple generations. So, and they can be lying scoundrels who steal and cheat and lie and change things. And they're going to say they talk to God, and they're going to say nothing changes. Mm-hmm. But what they do is they do what's really hard. They do something that I've tried to do, and I've failed multiple times. It's to get a bunch of people to all spend time together, to support each other, to feel good in each other's presence, to get a core set of heroes and myths and beliefs and songs and a sense of spirituality where they're like, yeah, let's keep this going even after the guy dies. That's what a prophet is, and nothing more.
Okay, John, Now I'm going to tell you this little Abraham Lincoln joke, and then I want to hand it off to Bill because he had great looking faces on. You're like, I can't even believe what's coming out of John's mouth. Here's the Abraham Lincoln story. Maybe you've heard it. How many legs does a dog have, John, if you call its tail a leg?
5.
4.
The answer is 4. Calling its tail a leg doesn't make it one.
So,
And I'll let you figure out why I'm telling you that joke right now.
Does,
That has to do with a prophet. Describing a prophet in that way doesn't make it a prophet in a Mormon sense.
no,
I don't know even who came up with that. If that came up,
I'm not
if you
saying
came
in
up
a
with that,
Mormon
that's
sense.
fine.
I'm not
That's
saying in a
fine.
Mormon sense.
That's
I'm
why I
saying
said. That's
in
why
a
I said
human sense.
Mormonism teaches a prophet very different than that.
But that's the thing. The church leaders are going to teach all sorts of stuff. They're going to teach whatever they need to teach to maintain their power and their money and their influence.
by
So they're
that
prophets too, in your definition.
What?
The leaders of the church are prophets in your definition.
Kind of, yeah.
So
Yeah.
is David Miscavige. So is
Yes.
Ernest Angley. So is
Yes.
Who's
Yes.
Ernest Angley?
Radio Free Mormon.
he's a TV evangelist.
You can tell how I feel about prophets by saying yes. L. Ron Hubbard, David Miscavige, Keith Raniere, Warren Jeffs,
But
all
if-
prophets.
If those are the list of true prophets, then you've diluted the meaning of prophets and to something that all of us go like, well, then
I'm not diluting anything. I'm just telling you what I observe.
yeah, I hear you. It's just that would just in some level that almost sees good in any super unhealthy human being who in
I'm
their
not saying it's good. I'm just saying it's what is.
okay. All right.
Oh, wait, do you think I'm saying that the Keith Raniere is good?
No,
Do you think I'm
know
saying that Warren Jeffs is good?
No, I know you're not. But what you're saying is on some level is we ought to appreciate these men's ability
I didn't say that either.
to keep a group
They
of
do the hard
people
stuff.
together to give
I
them
didn't say we should appreciate them, Bill. I just said that's what they are. That's all I'm saying.
okay.
Is
I
that's
feel
what
like
they
I
are.
should object at this point.
What's that?
What?
I feel like I should object for one of you at this point. No, I understand. I feel like John's describing the reality that we see from sociology and
It's
from
gross.
history of the people who claim to be prophets. I guess then, John, how does that connect to the value proposition? Like if you ask the average, they don't use the term beehive anymore, right? Whatever. You
No,
ask the
no
average
beehive.
young woman what a prophet is, they're not going to give you anything close to the. I mean, I agree with your definition of this is what the people who claim to be prophets actually are. I guess what then from that reality are you taking about the value proposition of the people today who claim to be prophets, or people like Joseph Smith who claim to be a prophet?
Well, this is where this. So, if you watch The Wizard of Oz, if you watch the Broadway musical Wicked, when the wizard is talking about how it's the song Wonderful, and what he says is I never asked for this or planned it in advance. I was simply blown here by the winds of chance. I never thought of myself as a Solomon or a Socrates. I knew who I was, one of your common dime a dozen mediocrities.
Why are you not?
Then I
singing
was
it?
brought here just because the folks at Oz needed someone to believe in. The people create the prophet. The people want a prophet. The prophet doesn't fool the people as much as the people create the prophet,
They
because
fool
in reality,
themselves.
they don't really care what the prophet has to say. They just want a community and a spiritual experience. And that's why I disagree that the prophets get to decide who's Mormon or that the rabbis get to decide who's Jewish. At some point, just like Judaism schismed, Mormonism will likely schism, and it has schismed because the people ultimately control what they want to follow.
Yeah.
And if the prophets go too far in the stray, they'll go in a different direction. But as long as the prophet is acceptable to the people, they'll endure all sorts of stuff because they're enjoying their experience satisfactorily.
I'll say one more thing, just back to the video, which is there's another false proposition that's done. So anytime modern day LDS leadership does something deficient, dishonest, deceptive, unhealthy, abusive, hurtful, we immediately go back to the scriptures of old and we go, well, there's plenty of bad people out there. Look at the prophets of old. When you take the religious mindset out completely, we just go, we shouldn't as a society tolerate the unhealthiest among us being at the head of us, controlling us and telling us what to do. And maybe those leaders of religions of old weren't any more true than leaders of the LDS Church today. In other words, we don't need to be led by really deeply unhealthy people. We can choose a different standard. But if we always work backwards and justify what happened before in order to justify what's happening now, we'll always just tolerate bad behavior.
Yeah, I feel like I'm deeply unhealthy enough I can lead myself.
I think all of us should be allowed to lead ourselves, right? The guru is inside of you.
Well,
If I understand what John's saying, sorry, Jim. If I understand what John's saying, and I just want to make sure I do, you're saying the truth claims it was never really about the truth claims. It's about the meaning and the utility that people derive from that belief system. Am I accurately describing the value proposition? Okay.
Yeah, people at the end of the day value the utility, or they leave.
I think that's one of the things about listening to the more nuanced apologists that I do appreciate, is they do seem to focus more on the meaning and the utility that they derive from this system. And I do have to say, as I've seen a lot of pushback on this series, and I roll at some of the stuff too, I think it would be the height of arrogance for me to say that people need to weigh truth and utility, and they would have to adopt my entire value system to weigh those things exactly like I do. And so that's one of the reasons I do appreciate this series, is those explanations are never going to work for me. But I know for a fact, let's say when I had first told my wife, and we were dealing with this local situation, like, I'm not sure if the church is true anymore. If my wife had said, no, I'm absolutely certain it's true, this may have been this path that these individuals are on and that they're helping create for people may have been the only path to keep my family intact. And I know that there are people who think no matter what cost I need to follow truth. I'm just going to tell you that is a very noble position. And I do believe it to an extent, but we're kidding ourselves if we're really saying that we're willing to compromise everything for truth. If you could save 1 million people by telling a lie, you should absolutely tell the lie and save the 1 million people. And so I do see the value that you're talking about, John, by basically saying, even if it was never about truth, there is a utility and a meaning that people can find in this system and can find in any system. I think then it's just, is that what you want to spend your life doing? Is that what resonates with you?
And of course, the drawback is that such a cynical definition rules out the use of a word for someone who actually is in contact with God.
Well, just to jump in, I don't know that I can add a whole lot or refute a whole lot here, but I'm reminded of a conversation that Terrell Givens had with Jared Halverson at BYU, where he said something that I had never considered before. And Jared Halverson said, it's not enough for the young people of the church for the church to be true. The church also has to be good. And that so much of the disaffection from the rising generation stems from the fact that they look at the church and they don't see the kind of utility that John is describing. On my podcast, we've been interviewing Greg Prince, and he says that any religious movement requires 3 elements. One is truth claims, and Greg says the young generation has absolutely no interest in those at all. Another is community, which I think is what John is kind of talking about here. And I think that's something that the church has sort of actively been dismantling for the past few years in ways that I find very concerning. You know, the kind of community I grew up in, where the church was sort of the center of the universe, and not because of doctrine, but because these are the people I remember our ward putting on a production of The Music Man, and every single stinking person in the ward was in it. Had absolutely nothing to do with doctrine or teachings, but that community was so strong and so powerful that it resonated with me in a way that has nothing to do with any of the church's truth claims. But the third element that Greg Prince talks about is this idea of moral authority, that the church has to have some kind of moral authority, and there's sort of a hunger for that. And I think that even in and out of the church, people aren't seeing voices that are sort of are respected as a moral authority. I mean, this goes to our politics as well as our religion. But this is, I think, a real challenge, because I think the church is not making the case for any of those three things to the rising generation. All right.
Thank
So
you.
that's
I'm
all
sorry. I was listening to you, but then I was trying to give you the full screen and have us be the small boxes, and it ended up being Bill for whatever reason.
Bill's
I don't know
very
why
fun
that
to
was.
look
Do you
at.
know why it was, Bill?
RFM, if you just down below,
happened?
if you just see in the
I
top
think I
left
just beat
corner,
myself a little.
in the top left corner of every box down below, there's just a gray and white little image of a silhouette. If you just
Oh,
hit
yeah.
that'll send that person up to the front of the screen.
Okay, and this is John. Hey,
Yeah.
John, I didn't want to just throw that dagger over there at you and leave you no chance to respond. The thing I said about your definition of prophet, leaving no word for someone who actually is in touch with God.
Well, I mean, are you asking me to respond personally? Because
Just if you want to, I'm giving you the opportunity to say whatever you would like before we go on.
I've yet to find someone I can trust to be the mouthpiece of God. They haven't either proven to me their credibility enough where I would give them that power, or what they've said has not been compelling enough to convince me. So I'm not going to close the idea that someone might be able to speak convincingly for God for me someday, but I have not met that person yet.
Mm-hmm.
Before we move,
and you just don't know it yet.
Or maybe it's RFM.
Before we move to the next clip, and I think Bill mentioned this, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that when we presume the biblical patriarchs are legitimate prophets, we are begging the question. Like, there is this inherent system by basically defending Joseph Smith, by pointing to the scripture that he built his system off of. You have one epistemic touch point, which is just really you believe the story, and that's fine. But I just want to highlight that logical fallacy that you are begging the question by basically saying, well, how do we know like the acceptable level of tolerance for a prophet? Well, if we look back at the past prophets, it's like, well, you're already assuming those people were legitimate prophets.
Yeah, and I think what is it when you kill everybody of a nation? What's that word?
Genocide.
Yeah, when Joshua commits genocide, I think the bar on that prophetic conduct is pretty low.
I mean, even Abraham, he didn't use Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, but when my last calling in the church was teaching all 4 years of gospel doctrine, and it was the first time that I was prepping a lesson on Abraham and Isaac's sacrifice story as a parent, and I literally remember sitting at this desk prepping that lesson and saying, well, I guess it's a good thing that there's a terrestrial kingdom, because when I finally actually had kids of my own, my oldest just turned 12 on John's birthday, I was sitting there going, there is no way in the world, now that I have contextualized the way that the Spirit speaks to me, which is based on gentle feelings, that I would ever feel comfortable like showing that level of commitment based on that level of communication from a deity. I would also say that I think when we hold up these biblical stories as like legitimate history that actually happened, it leads us to some very ethically questionable places. And what I mean by that is, like, I've shared this with my father-in-law, who's still a believer, and said, like, what would you have done if you felt like God was inspiring you to kill one of your children, including my wife? And he said to me verbatim, that is a very difficult question for me to answer. That's crazy to me. The fact
That's scary. That's a scary answer, isn't it? That's a difficult question for me to answer, whether I'd kill my own daughter.
Yes. To me, if your religion doesn't give you a very simple answer to that question, and I understand even from the same system, people are going to be more on my side here. So I'm not saying that everyone has this view. But to me, if your religion can't have you have a simple answer to that question of, will I kill my own kid? It probably isn't worth very much to me.
Do y'all mind if I respond to a comment that a viewer listener made?
No, please do. And then we'll go to the next clip. Is that okay with everybody? Give John the last word on this one.
I'll be fast. So Tears of Grace 23 wrote, but John, why do we need someone to speak for God for us? Why can't we have our personal relationship with God?
Oh,
so Tears, two things I want to say. Yes, that's how I feel. And I think that's how pretty much everyone on this panel feels. I don't want to speak for Jim. But that's not what I'm saying. I will never forget the time I was teaching elders quorum in my North Logan, Utah ward, where I was trying to teach a nuanced gospel topics lesson in elders quorum about probably polygamy or blacks in the priesthood. And some guy raised his hand and he said, I don't want to understand the sophistications of all the history and the doctrine. I just want someone to tell me what to do. And here's what literally said that. And this is a guy who probably didn't have a great relationship with his wife. He probably was having a really hard time with his kids. He hated his job. I think he was just trying to keep the wheels on the wagon. And this guy just wanted to tell him what to do, what to believe, how to think, and how to kind of stay out of trouble. And he wanted to keep things really simple. And I think more people than not are like that guy than are like the people on this panel. And I don't mean that in an insulting way, like we're better than them. I don't see it that way, because some of the best people I know are like that. They're just like, tell me how to serve. Tell me where to show up. Where do I bring a casserole? Where do I show up to help? How much money do I give? Where do I give it? I know a lot of people like that, and they're some of the best people I know. I think it's just a different brain or a different set of experiences, and I'll stop.
Yeah, and let me just go ahead and say, in response to that, the comment that you were responding to. No, I was asking you a question. It got muddled in there somewhere, but no, that's not John's position, which seems obvious to me, but apparently it was confusing in how it got talked about. So I'll take responsibility for that. And we're going to play another Terrell Givens clip, which I have titled The Worst Parable Application Ever. See if you agree with me.
It seems to me that, like the parable of the treasure in the field, my conclusion is that it's worth buying the whole field for those treasures, regardless of some of the difficulties along the way.
Oh my gosh, it's a good thing this doesn't have a laugh track, huh? Can I just suggest that when you are defending Mormonism, okay, let's lay off of the parables about buying fields with treasure hidden in them, okay? Because the problem with the treasure that's hidden in the field is the same with Joseph Smith and his treasure digging as it is with Mormonism, is that those treasures are by and large hidden, and you've got to take it on faith they're really there until you die. Then you find out. Let's see. Colby, can we have you go first on this one? Any thoughts about that clip?
Well, I mean, I'm trying to understand everybody on the panel's views. And so I'm trying to think through, and I think I would say, I'm trying to take John's position or predict what John would say, or based on his last answer. And I think maybe if it's not about finding actual treasure, it's about participating in the field with your friends and finding meaning in the field. I guess there's part of me that can understand that it's not really about the truth claims. That approach is just never going to work for me personally. I was one of those people that grew up in the church, and I really didn't like Mormon culture. One of my kids is born on Pioneer Day. I think that's weird. I always thought our veneration of pioneers was weird. I thought our veneration of some of the early church figures, including Joseph Smith, were weird. I was always more of a New Testament type Mormon. And to me, the church really only had value if it was true. And I understand that people are going to weigh that differently than me. So to me, it's not worth buying the entire field. But I do definitely acknowledge that for people who don't care as much about the absolute truth claims, like, who am I to say that they have to care about it as much as I do, right?
Well, I think everybody on this panel cares about truth claims, which is why we are where we are. Jim, you've been talking quite a bit. I'm going to come back to you. Let's go to Bill, then John, then Jim, okay, on this clip.
All right.
This is such an insider lens. You're born into a certain group who only has a certain field available to them. And you don't realize there are thousands, if not millions of fields. And there are lots of different ways to live out a life. And one inside a high, if we apply it to any other religion, inside a high demand fundamentalist religion, if you said you can buy the field of Scientology, and you You can find a few treasures there, but you have to deal with L. Ron Hubbard's teachings and all the payments to the books and the Dianetics and David Miscavige and all the abuses he carries out. Or you could, buy the field of the Jehovah's Witnesses or the Christian Scientist or the Seventh-day Adventist. At some point you go, I don't really want those fields. And the only reason you're feeling like, yeah, I'm going to take the Mormon field is because you were born into a Mormon family. As a convert to the church, I realized the moment I knew it wasn't good and it wasn't true, I realized I didn't need to be on this field anymore.
Very good, John.
Bill, I think that's a valid point of view, and I think that's the path most of us have taken. So I'm not going to disagree with you, but I'm trying to understand people that view things differently than me, and that's the standpoint I'm coming from. And Colby, I think you articulated that quite well. I think there are people who really don't care about the truth claims. They just want a good experience, and they're more validity. They're more utility Mormons or religious people, utility than validity. And I think Terrell is just doing his job. I know for a fact that Terrell says different things in private than he says in public. And that if you pulled Terrell aside, he would say there's many paths up Mount Fuji. There's not one true church. This is not the one true church. I know for a fact that Terrell would probably say that privately, but he's not going to admit that publicly because he's getting paid by the church, and it's not smart for him to do that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So his defense is one of hypocrisy.
Or being strategic. You know what I mean? Or, keeping his cards close to his vest. I do think RFMU, I joke about Sith stealing and absolutes, but I do, if someone's been traumatized by the church, I get why they only want to see things in black and white. Like my wife, Margie, believe it or not, she really doesn't like the church, and she doesn't like it when I talk about it, and she doesn't like anything to do with it really. And I get it. But so if you're traumatized, yeah, you're going to see it as evil and bad and horrible. But there's a lot of people that derive value from the church, and that's largely why they stay, because they derive value from it.
Can I also say that we probably need to recognize, especially those of us on the ex-Mormon side, that there are more damaging groups that people can be a part of than the church. That is something that has softened my view towards people who find themselves in this nuanced position a lot. That's the reality.
What logical fallacy is that, Colby?
The false equivalence.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. You taught it to me.
I'll just hang my head in shame and think about how I'm going to pivot out of that one.
The student has become the master. Okay, Jim, where do you?
All right. What am I supposed to say?
What
Somebody
do you
tell
think
me what
about
to
this
say.
incredibly spiritual and insightful application of the parable of the treasure hidden in the field?
Well, I want to go back to one of the comments that came up here earlier that I fully agreed with, that said, nobody stands between you and God.
Well, except for President Nelson and like 14 others.
Well, and I think that's a problem, that people see President Nelson standing between them and God.
Well, that's what he tells us. That's how he tells us we're supposed to see him. Prophets will always teach you the truth.
That's very different from saying prophets are interceding for you on behalf of. The reason I'm reading the comments, and some people are saying nice things, and a lot of them are things like, I don't understand how Jim Bennett can do this, and and the reason I stay in the church is because this is where I've discovered, and this is going to sound way too I don't know what it is. You're always sort of backed up to the wall of faith, and this is where I have discovered God, and where I feel God wants me. I mean, it's really just that simple, and I think probably, I've sort of again created the Jim Bennett Mormonism that can reconcile the idea of this being the only true church and also the idea of universalism, because I think at the core of Mormonism is universalism, whether even Russell Nelson realizes that or not. If it isn't, then what are we doing all this temple work for?
Well, I don't know, because Elder Oaks has been pretty specific about their saying that there is a big difference between the celestial, which is
yeah, I understand. Well, and I believe that but I believe there is movement between the kingdoms. I believe that the eternity is a frickin' long time. The idea that God gives up on you after mortality and that you're condemned to, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so in looking at this, in my experience, every church leader I've ever come in contact with stood between me and God. I think that's a legitimate response, and I think that's a real problem. And I think that's one of the things that this documentary is sort of designed to alleviate, to demonstrate that people have found connections to God in this church in ways that I think are not typical of the kinds of people that are in John DeLynne's gospel doctrine class who just want to say, just tell me what to do. So as I listen to all of this, I mean, if anybody is expecting me to sort of sit here and rebut everybody and convince you all that you all made a terrible mistake and the church is true in exactly the way that Bruce R. McConkie always said it was, that's not what I'm going to do. I don't live there. I mean, I'm listening to this, and the thing that I've discovered sort of in my weird little ministry, if I even want to call it that, is that the people that are on the borders of the church, whether they're on the edge of the outside or the edge of the inside, are people who feel very isolated and very alone. And we don't have conversations with them. Those of us in the church aren't willing to talk to them. We're scared of them. I mean, I just listen to that, and I hear pain. I hear so much pain, and I think there's pain in the church as well as for those who leave. And so I just kind of want to sit with that a little bit as I listen to you. I mean, if you're looking for rebuttals, if you're looking for, here comes Jim Bennett to come roaring in, I don't want to throw the church under the bus, but I also don't think that that's not my purpose, and I don't think that's the purpose of this documentary. I think I want these conversations to be happening within earshot of the people that are in John DeLynne's gospel doctrine class, because those people don't even know this conversation is happening. They don't even know. I mean, it's astonishing to me that when people leave, it's as if they were never there. It's like, okay, we can forget about them. They're a non-person. We can move on. And that has to stop. That's not helpful to anybody, whether you're in or whether you're out. So as I sit here, and it's like, I'm sitting here going, okay, do I respond to that? And do I push back on that? And it's like, I think these are the kinds of conversations that people need to listen to. These are the kinds of conversations that people in the church need to hear.
You're showing admirable restraint, Jim. And
well,
we want to have you here to have your voice on the show so that we get a fuller and more rounder perspective.
Well, I mean, I just, there are so many people that they hear the name John DeLynne, or they hear the name Bill Reel, or RFM, and they think Korihor. I mean, that's the only template we have in the church. Everybody who leaves is a Korihor. There's no possibility that somebody could have left because of anything, any kind of intellectual integrity, any kind of moral compass. They had to have been deceived by Satan. Korihor not only railed on the church, but he admitted later on that he always knew the church was true. So you have members in the church that'll point to you guys and say they secretly know. They've just been, Satan has whispered in their ears. They've made a deal. I mean, just all this. They have to paint this sort of template of everybody who leaves as abandoning every good thing about them that was present while they were in the church. Suddenly, when they leave, everything good about them vanishes and disappears. And that's, I mean, That is a huge blind spot for members of the church. And that's one of the reasons why I am so proud of this documentary, is that even though it doesn't confront that blind spot nearly to the extent that it needs to be confronted, it's a step in that direction.
Okay, great. Well, here, I want to dunk on Elder Bednar in this next clip, because they don't have anybody there that I saw who was speaking for the church. Maybe they did have one person, but this is a clip of him. It's a famous clip, and I titled it "Elder David Bednar Stars in 1984." It's a compilation. It is so Orwellian, especially at the end here, where he describes things. And I want to get your thoughts on it. I'll tell you why I think it's Orwellian, then we'll throw it around to everybody to get your insights.
The church doesn't need their money, but those people need the blessings that come from obeying God's commandments.
If a destitute family is faced with the decision of paying their tithing or eating, they should pay their tithing. The bishop can help them with their food.
Do we have the option not to pay our tithing?
Carlos Diezmos?
Nope.
No.
It's breaking a covenant. It is not the exercise of agency anymore. Because what happened to our individual agency? It was enlarged. Now it's more important to represent him. Is this making sense? I mean, it was never.
No, it's not making sense at all. And this is the point I wanted to make, because how is it when you're getting rid of real agency, in the same breath you say it's actually being enlarged, it's being increased? That's how Orwellian this was. What are your thoughts about this, Colby?
Well, I was leaning way too close to the camera and grabbing my copy of Why Orwell Matters by Christopher Hitchens, which I've been reading recently. It is very Orwellian. I think one of the things that's really funny about his take on agency is that he rejects the use of the term free agency because it's a term that's not found in the scriptures. And then he gives an alternative that's also not found in the scriptures, which
moral
is
agency,
which is just really funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it comes right out of, it's not actually out of 1984. I would say it's more Animal Farm. All animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. But yeah, it is the same thought. And I don't know, Bednar has always given me the ick, even when I was fully active in the church. I remember him telling a story in General Conference about castigating 2 missionaries that spent time probably being stressed and trying to impress his family, and they were lingered too long, and he just like laid into them. I also just know a lot of people who knew him when he was the president of BYU Idaho, and I don't know. What do you want me to
think,
say?
Jim? Does Elder Bednar give you the ick too?
Well, that clip, actually, the one that jumps out at me is Elder Robbins, because the summer before my mission, my father was the president of what was then the Franklin Institute, and it's now Franklin Covey, the Franklin Day Planners. And Lynn Robbins worked there and was my direct supervisor when I was the janitor at Franklin Covey. And he got really mad because I put a life-size poster of Mick Jagger on the back of the janitorial closet, and he made me take it down. And so I've had a grudge against him ever since, because that poster was awesome. So anyway,
I thought Mick Jagger had achieved the status of sort of a cultural hero in Mormonism.
In Mormonism, Mick Jagger has?
Yeah, because of the story about the guy who sat down next to him.
Oh, yeah.
The GA.
Yeah.
A huge made up story about the GA who met Mick Jagger on a plane. Remember that?
That story made me break all my Rolling Stones records when I came back from my mission. And they would have been worth something. I feel terrible. I mean,
everybody knows. Tell me who the name of the guy was. I can't remember. Was it Cook?
Gene R. Cook, I think.
It was a different Cook, though. It wasn't Quentin. It was Gene R. Cook. It's right. He says in General Conference, I believe it is, that he
was
he
not
flies
a General
everywhere.
Conference. It was at I am intimately familiar with this story.
Was it like BYU Idaho or something?
It was BYU.
Okay, give a talk. And he says through his teeth, he tells the truth right through his teeth, that he's on one of these planes and he sits down and he looks over and it's Mick Jagger. And he says to Mick Jagger, he says, "No." What is it? It's something about.
Why does Gene R. Cook suddenly have an English accent here?
Yeah, I think you're putting the accent on the wrong side.
He's susceptible to the powers of the Jagger. And what it is that he quotes not Dean Jagger.
Dean
He
Jaggers, who are to Brigham Young now.
Yeah, I know. He quotes Mick Jagger. Dean Jagger is a Mormon. Mick Jagger, jury's still out. Probably not going to happen. But Mick Jagger tells Gene Cook, who relates it to Mormons. That's how we know about it. That his whole goal, all rock and roll is about, is leading the young kids away from God and getting them involved in sex and drugs. Right?
Our music is calculated to drive the kids to sex. Mick, yeah, there we go. Mick just wanted Jim to fornicate. I could quote that entire talk to you verbatim if you need me to, just so you know. I've heard it that many times.
Why have you heard it so many times, Jim?
Because I love the Rolling Stones, and I heard this and I thought, I'm going to burn in hell because I love the Rolling Stones. My son served his mission in Argentina and was diagnosed with scrupulosity. And I told him the story, and he says, "Oh, I didn't know you had scrupulosity too."
He's a chip off the old block. By the way, for everybody who's watching, this story is what Mormonism is about. Not this nonsense that the eggheads are spinning in the clips. This is what Mormonism is about. If some GA tells you that Mick Jagger said blah, 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 then you go out and you break up all your effing records. That's what you do.
And I go back and think about it, and I imagine being Mick Jagger, and some religious zealot essentially sits next to me and wants to strike up a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What would I say to get him to shut up?
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I just have so much more empathy for Mick Jagger at this point. Our music is calculated to drive the kids to sex. You know,
sounds like you have some sympathy for the devil there. John, what are you thinking?
First of all, Sympathy for the Devil is one of my favorite rock songs of all.
Wonderful song.
And yeah, I think Bednar's horrible. And I think that there's so many terrible leaders in this church. Unfortunately, I don't even know that I know of a really great one, honestly. I don't think I could name a great leader amongst the 15.
I can name one. Patrick Kieran. He was in my ward for like 7 years.
He's a limey.
He's wonderful from the pulpit, and he's even more wonderful in person.
Yeah.
And that's very rare. You know, I have met a number of general authorities who I won't name because they're not wonderful.
Everybody other than Patrick Kieran.
No, I wouldn't say that either.
So Jim, my response to that would be, we'll see. I think we all had hope that Holland was, Elder Oaks started out as one of the founders of the dialogue board, right? And we all know how he turned out. Elder Holland, was supposed to be a progressive, thoughtful, tolerant guy. He's turned, the longer they serve in the quorum, I think the more of a disappointment they turn out to be. Even Uchtdorf has kind of allowed himself to be silenced and marginalized for whatever reason. And maybe if he outlives Holland, we'll see the revenge of Uchtdorf and we'll see something amazing. But I wouldn't put money that Kieran's awesomeness endures 10 or 15 years in the quorum. That's just, but I hope I'm wrong. But the thing I was going to say is, it is unconscionable that with $300 billion plus they can't come up with better leaders, because it doesn't have to be this bad. Like, as resilient as I think religion is as much value I think religion has, but as many problems with the truth claims, and with as many problems as religion is having these days, the church could afford better leaders.
It's almost
probably. I tell you, when it comes to Elder Kieran, I'm glad you like him. Obviously, different people have different takes. Okay, I know he's very, very popular. I'm glad you like him. When I hear him talk, it's like just hearing Elder Wong with an English accent.
Who's Elder Wong? Elder Gong?
Oh, Gong. That's it.
Yeah.
Whatever his name is, Elder Gong. He's just vapid. He says a lot of words, but he just sort of kind of a mess of words. To me, and I think Elder Kieran's similar to that, just with a different accent.
John, go ahead, Jim. Sorry.
No, well, I mean, just in quick response to that, I had a conversation with somebody who said the best way to listen to General Conference is not
dead.
What
Is dead.
Is dead. That's the best
Yes.
way to listen. Barring death, the best way to listen to General Conference is not as the apostles speaking to the general membership of the church, but as the apostles speaking to each other. Because I think one of the reasons why General Conference very often feels vapid or empty is that they can't come out and do anything unless they have total unanimity on anything. And getting total unanimity on anything is almost impossible. And so what you have is these apostles essentially subtweeting each other and trying to, I listen and I hear Kieran and Uchtdorf and others with a very sort of universalist message. This is Patrick Kieran's God is a relentless pursuit of you and that sort of thing. And then you hear the Bednar wing and those kinds of things with this very sort of exclusivist message. And I think that it's them sort of trying to hash this out in public to some degree to try to get the church on their side and try to persuade their brethren, because these are men that are thrown together for the rest of their lives. And the idea that they all love each other and are happy with each other the entire, I mean, is there any person that you would work with until the day you die for 30 years?
Not to mention being married to them forever.
Hey, Jim, can I challenge you on one thing, Jim?
Sure.
So I agree that the way things are structured is for no decision to be made without unanimity. But we all know from what Nelson and Oakes did when Monson was still prophet, by doing the November policy and then Nelson going rogue and claiming it was doctrine, we all know that they can go rogue.
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's true that the way it's structured is they need to have unanimity, but in theory, a progressive apostle could go rogue and just say whatever he wanted to in General Conference and say whatever he wanted to when he was visiting a stake and tweet whatever he wanted to. It is theoretically possible, but for some reason they don't.
Well, there's an example where one did, and it's very instructive, because if you watch the 2010 talk by Boyd K. Packer.
I know about this.
It's actually in the documentary. He tried to go rogue and he got slapped down.
Well, I'm saying that in theory they could go rogue and defy any opposition they experience, and just be courageous, right?
That's what Bruce R. McConkie did, and it's also what the current president did when he labeled the policy of exclusion as revelation from God in January 2016.
In theory, a progressive apostle could do the same thing, just for more liberal, tolerant, progressive causes, if they wanted to, if they had the courage and the fortitude to. They don't have to, acquiesce to the unanimity structure.
I think that they do. Certainly it's not equal with the more conservative, but I think that they do. There's enough Uchtdorf talks, enough Kieran talks. He's starting to get a few out there. Gong is having his share, so that there's enough of the talks that progressive members of the church can cite to think that the leaders of the church are on their side, whereas the rest have all these other talks they can cite to think the leaders of the church are on their side. Hey, can we go to the next clip? Let's do that. This is Patrick Mason. Oh, this was so funny. It really struck me. I've heard this argument before, but it never struck me so much as that's free agency. This is the definition of free agency among the Mormons.
I think one of Mormonism's biggest inconveniences is that we go to a church and are part of a ward that we don't choose. It's just based on where you live. So that means you're thrown together with people who you wouldn't affiliate with otherwise. Just like Jesus says, it's easy to love your friends. It's easy to love people who are just like you. And the sociological genius of the Mormon ward is that it doesn't allow you to do that.
Living in a Christian.
So, Bill, Being like Jesus is a virtue so excellent that we can take away your free agency in order to inculcate it in the members. What do you think, Bill?
What I'll say to that clip is there are 1,000 things in Mormonism that from the moment you are BIC, born in the covenant, till the day you die and go in a coffin and have a specific outfit placed on you, you are taught from birth to the grave that what's really in charge here is the institution, the system. And there are 1,000 ways that you are taught that your job is to give up your actual free choice and just do what these guys tell you, to the point where the one that sticks out is when Elder Oaks tells this young lady, he's at something, they're raising their hand, they're asking questions. It's a youth conference. There's audio of this somewhere out there on Reddit. And this Elder Oaks explains to this young girl that her parents went off and had a question in the church.
Yes.
They went and prayed about it. They did all the steps they were supposed to.
About tithing.
And when they got to the very end, when they got an answer from God that was different than what the church said, Elder Oaks taught this young lady that answer was not from God, because if it was from God, it would be the answer that the church wants them to have.
Which was pay your tithing in the example.
And going back to the last clip, I mean, an institution with $265 billion telling the poor to choose to pay their tithing instead of feeding their kids. It's the reason why we had a problem with Al Gore when he was talking about global warming while he was flying private jets all over. And we all said, like, wait a minute, isn't he as culpable as anyone for destroying the ozone layer and warming the planet? The church seems to not know what healthy morality is. And it wants to, not only is it not healthy on moral things, but then it imposes that unhealthy morality on all of us and tells us, you have to do this. Doesn't matter what your gut tells you. Doesn't matter what the Holy Ghost says. Doesn't matter what happens in personal revelation. At the end of the day, what really matters is you do what we tell you to do.
Thank you for making that point, because that's going to play into a personal revelation clip we have coming up with Patrick Mason. John DeLynn, what do you think about this?
I hope that when Patrick Mason, in the raw footage, he attributed that idea to Eugene England, because he definitely got that from Eugene England. Eugene England wrote an essay called "Why the Church is as True as the Gospel," and in that, Eugene England makes that point. So I'm hoping Patrick attributed Eugene England in the raw footage, and I actually think it's a really good point. I have very fond memories of serving fellow ward members, getting to know people in the ward. I miss having a local ward community. This is just my personality. I don't think everybody feels this way. I wasn't traumatized by the church like others. I'm an extrovert. I loved being part of a ward. I miss being part of a ward. And I love knowing people in my neighborhood, being served by them and having a chance to serve them. And I love being associated with a variety of people and not being in an echo chamber all the time, and not only being with people like me. I value that diversity. And I agree with Patrick. I think that's one of the strengths of religion and Mormonism specifically.
Is it a virtue great enough to sacrifice free agency?
Well, not for me, no.
I don't see how you're getting that from that clip.
Because you don't have a choice of where you go to church. You have to go to the ward that you're assigned to by your geographic location.
Well, okay. But I don't think that, I mean, that doesn't come anywhere in the documentary where we're talking about free agency. And I don't think he's trying to make a point about
it. Doesn't sacrifice your free agency because you don't have to go to church. You can just not go at all.
Yeah. I mean,
if you want to go to church, you go where they tell you to do.
Just so, I mean, I think that you guys have been around enough to other people in other religions to know that of all the strange things about Mormonism, this is one that they actually, it's very much rubber hits the road kind of. You can't choose where you go to church. You have to go to this church. That's very unusual, I think, for most churches. Usually you can go where you want to go.
The benefit of the church doing that is they can track sexual predators better, as poorly as they do it, by making sure that they keep records on people, and people go where they, people identify where they are and they can be tracked, is like the only chance the church has of really tracking and punishing and controlling sexual predators.
Assuming the sexual predators will be good enough to go where they're assigned. And the church keeps tabs on them. Colby?
Yeah, I'm actually gonna. I mean, I agree with everything Bill said, but maybe not as applied to this specific quote. So I served my mission in Tempe, Arizona, and I was in some areas like out in the East Valley, there, like Queen Creek, Chandler, that were really well to do. Like one of my areas literally had a private air park in it, one of the subdivisions. But
Is that like a landing strip?
yeah, like literally a subdivision built around a landing strip. That's how rich some of the people in my mission were.
And so instead of carports, they have airports, or air
Correct.
hangars.
Correct. But as part of that same mission, I was in downtown Tempe, which is really rough area. Like literally we had to get moved in the middle of the night one night because our next door neighbor had been stabbed. And that ward had one of the most diverse, racially, socioeconomically, politically, even their approach to the gospel had one of the most diverse groups of people that attended it that I'd ever been a part of. And I loved it. I thought it was so beautiful. And just knowing a little bit about Patrick's background and where he's gotten his education and traveled to different areas, he's speaking from his experience. So I feel like this is one of those areas where it very much depends on the experience you've had, and you can even have had different experiences based on different areas you've lived in. In my area in Boise, it's not a super diverse place racially, socioeconomically in the church. It just isn't. But I think there is a special magic to that, finding that real like level of ward family that I haven't found in any other organization. I definitely understand what you're talking about as far as the choice to attend goes. I just don't see that necessarily as like a violation of free agency or anything that's troubling to me. I really, really appreciated the wards I was in where it was super diverse and people really did make room for a difference of opinion and allowed people to fit in who otherwise wouldn't. And I thought that was something that was really beautiful about my time in the church, honestly.
Let me give an example. So back in Ohio, in my ward there was a woman in the ward who had a misunderstanding with the bishop at the time. And she wanted to go somewhere else. She did not want to be in that ward. She didn't trust the bishop. So she reached out to the stake presidency, and she wants her and her husband and their kids to be able to go somewhere else, still enjoy the full capacity of Mormonism, but not have to be under this bishop that she perceived as having done something unhealthy. And she wasn't allowed. You can't in Mormonism do that. Whether the misunderstanding is legit, which in many times it can be, and maybe it could be a misunderstanding, there should be freedom for somebody if they really just don't feel safe in a particular congregation. They should be allowed to attend another congregation and still be able to fully participate. And so when I said that story, when I said my comment, I'm referring to stories like that where it is not in the best interest of individual healthiness to force people to attend a ward that in at least some rare instances, it doesn't benefit them to be in that ward.
Yeah, and those experiences definitely happen. I'll just say I had the exact opposite experience where after my wife and I had been on John's show in 2022, we were meeting with the area president and the stake president. And at least in that circumstance, our area president and stake president told us that we were free to attend any ward we wanted to in the stake. They would move our records. So I guess it does come down sometimes, unfortunately, to like that idea of leader roulette. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention I had the exact opposite experience where they were bending over backwards to ask us to just attend. So
I was involved in a similar situation, though I won't go into detail, where my recollection, it's been a number of years. My recollection is that the first presidency had to give the thumbs up on a member or family of members attending a ward different than the one in which they lived, even within the same stake. This was.
I think that's true. Yes.
So let me just say a couple things. Like with same-sex marriage or with trans issues, we all know that there are bishops that are more lenient than others on those types of issues. I think it's the same thing with this ward boundary issue. There are bishops that turn a turn a blind eye or whatever it is, and allow people to attend their wards when they shouldn't. So, it's not as black and white as maybe we're portraying it here, because there is some flexibility, and it's basically based on leadership roulette. The other thing I just wanted to say is, I think if y'all have heard of Dunbar's number, it's this idea that the human brain can't really be in community with more than 150 people at any one time. If they allowed anyone to attend any ward, I think that would lead to some wards being massive and other wards being teeny. And I think there's a benefit to knowing everyone in your ward, and keeping it at the size of around 150 is consistent with what our brains are really capable of doing. And I think that might be a positive effect of how current wards are structured.
You may be right, and I do think that there are a myriad of reasons for taking away our freedom to choose.
Well, I want to point out also that I think this has changed to some degree, in that when I was came back from my mission and went back to the University of Southern California, ward hopping was encouraged, particularly for single members so I went to the USC student ward. I could have gone to the LA First Ward, which was the singles ward. I was living in the Westwood First Ward, I was living with my aunt and uncle, and that was the ward that I was in the boundaries of. And so there are times and circumstances where this has not been as much of an issue. But it's really frustrating, because now my daughter is at the University of Southern California getting her doctorate. And I went back to the USC Institute where I went to Institute, but also that was where we had sacrament meeting for the USC ward. I met my wife in the USC ward, and it doesn't exist anymore. The USC student ward is gone. The UCLA student ward is gone. All of the stakes in Los Angeles have been merged into one. There's only one LA stake now, and the Santa Monica stake has been absorbed into it, and all this. And there's only one YSA ward, I think, in the entire city of Los Angeles, which is just staggering to me.
What's going on?
Too much Rolling Stones.
Too much. Mick Jagger has had his revenge. So,
you think Mick Jagger didn't know about that story you told Gene Cook?
I don't. I hope he does. I hope he gets a good big kick out of it.
I think he must.
But I grew up in Southern California. Everybody thinks I grew up in Utah because my dad was a senator, but they moved back to Utah. They grew up in Utah. They moved back to Utah when I graduated from high school, and I stayed in LA. And my ward in LA was exactly, I think, what Colby's talking about, in that the geographical space was large enough that it included people from all different sort of economic backgrounds. Racial backgrounds, not so much. But economically, you had poor people and you had rich people and you had everybody in between. And I think there really is a lot of value in that. But now that I live in Utah, my ward boundary is 6 blocks, and it's very homogenous. Although if I didn't live in this ward boundary, then I wouldn't have Leanne Mason in my ward, who was Patrick Mason's mother. And his late father, Mike Mason, was our home teacher for years and years and spoke at my twin boys' baptism. And they're just some of the most beautiful, wonderful human beings in the world. And I don't know that I would have ever sought them out if I weren't thrown together in the ward boundary. So I think there are pros and cons to it, but I find it just a little weird that this is somehow an indictment of free agency, because I don't really think that's what Patrick.
Oh, it is absolutely. I mean, it couldn't be more clear cut. And
but RFM, you can't drink alcohol, you can't drink coffee or tea, you can't have sex with whoever you want. Like the church.
This is a an amoral proposition about where you go to church. Okay, I think we can all agree on that. And this is the problem. And you're actually giving examples, John. This is the template for the way the church takes away free agency in order to get you to the celestial kingdom.
No, it's just a management decision to help them run things the way they think they should be run. It's a bureaucratic management policy decision. Like,
okay.
Somebody says Jim is a California Mormon, not a real Mormon. It makes sense now.
I think there's at least one apostle who said there's no distinction between the policy and the doctrine of the church. It's all given by revelation.
I know. I'm not. I take everything they say with a grain of salt, and I think members should too.
Okay. All right, then. Let's go to the next clip. This is Patrick Mason. Oh, chopping off heads. Now, when he recorded this, I expect it was 6 years ago. So although it was before Lori Vallow, it was certainly after the Laffertys, both of whom used this analogy.
And I think that's a powerful tool for Mormons. I think there's also some instability in that because your personal revelation might be different than my personal revelation. Your personal revelation might tell you that, when you read the story of Nephi, that you should take a sword and go whack off somebody's head, and my personal revelation doesn't. Well, how do we know? How do we adjudicate those competing claims of revelation?
How indeed? That's a deep question. How would you begin to answer that? Let's go to, man, I'm having trouble remembering which way I went because I'm trying to reverse it the next time. So, Colby, let's go to you. You look like you have something to say.
Well, I mean, I've already told my story about reconciling myself with the Abraham story. This is exactly the issue with allowing people, and I don't mean this in a way that I'm like hostile to all of it, but this is what happens when people, because in Mormonism, revelation is driven by feelings. It's not a direct line from God to you. It's always communicated through your feelings. That's how we understand the Spirit to speak to us. And this is exactly the issue with the interpretation of those feelings. This is why, Thomas Paine in Age of Reason is very critical of the idea of revelation, because you really can't, when you get to that question that Patrick asked at the end, like, how do we sort that out? You can't, because revelation is fundamentally the claim that you know something in a way that you cannot demonstrate to anyone else. So, and I'll use an example. I know we're going to talk about it on Friday, but like the conversation that Jim and Jacob Hansen had, they both are claiming, hopefully I'm not putting words into Jim's mouth he'll disagree with, but they're both claiming really this a form of authority and speaking from a form of authority, and they disagree with each other. And there's no way to reconcile, like, to an outside person. To me, it's just like both people are, I obviously side more with Jim, but it's really just two people who are claiming to have access to information that I can't really have access to. I don't really know what to do with it from my point of view. Jim, you better go next, because I feel like I just strawmanned your position terribly.
I think that's a teaser for Friday. I don't want to dive into Jacob Hansen here.
Nobody does.
Okay.
So
then let's go. Then Jim, do you have anything else you wanted to say about the clip, if not about Colby?
Colby is a gentleman and a scholar. I
prefer Rando. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, you're a Rando. I forgot you were a Rando. You're a gentleman and scholar, Rando. The whole idea of personal revelation, I think, as a Platonic ideal, independent of the way that it is lived in the church, is a magnificent thing. In practice, it's messy and difficult, and the church doesn't really know how to manage it, and isn't necessarily comfortable with it if it goes beyond the kinds of boundaries that we're talking about here. But I think as you read the scriptures and as you read the actual theology, the principle is a very powerful one. And it really is the reason why I am still in the church, is that I very much believe in a God, and I believe that I have as much direct access to heaven as Russell M. Nelson does, and that every member of the church has as much direct access to heaven as Russell M. Nelson does. And I think the church is willing to concede that in theory, but really discourages it in practice.
So, John, moving it over to you. Excellent insight. I like it. John, moving it over to you. When Patrick Mason says that, you get personal revelation saying you should chop somebody's head off, and I get revelation saying, no, you shouldn't. How do we mediate that? It doesn't seem like it's a difficult thing to me. What do you think?
No, I think it's brilliant. And I had those questions when I was growing up in the church. I had friends who were Baptist and Catholic and evangelical. They all said that the Holy Ghost told them that their churches were true. And that confused me in high school. It basically is the epistemology question. What I think is brilliant about this documentary is that they're saying the quiet things out loud. Mm-hmm. They're saying things like, how do we really trust anyone's revelation? And they're saying things out loud like prophets are fallible and we shouldn't hold them as infallible. And they're also, again, having people like me and Bill and Jeremy and others on. And that's the brilliance of this documentary. It's a Trojan horse for truth. It's a Trojan horse for a healthier life view. It's a Trojan horse for a more reasonable perspective on the church, a healthier perspective on the church. I'm not sure this documentary is going to be healthy for the church. And I can talk about that maybe later. But the brilliance is it's saying all the quiet things out loud with a bunch of people either paid by the church or who are respected by the church. And in that sense, I think it's revolutionary and extremely courageous.
Following your analogy, John, of a Trojan horse, in your analogy, who are the Trojans and who are the Greeks?
The Trojans sent the horse, right?
Yes.
The Trojans are the people who...
No, I'm sorry. The Greeks sent the horse.
Is that right?
Into Troy, yeah. That's why it was filled with Greeks.
So I think the Greeks are people who care about truth and health of the individual.
And who's that?
People who care about truth and the health of the individual.
Okay, is that the Mormons or the post-Mormons?
That's, in this case, the progressive Mormons and the ex-Mormons.
But not the Orthodox Mormons, is what you're saying?
I don't see them represented in the film at all.
Yeah.
No one, is there an Orthodox Mormon in the film?
Well, we get to see David Bednar, right?
Yeah, I was going to say we watched clips of David Bednar, but not sharing his experience. Yeah.
And there's that other, there's a young woman's leader.
Aren't they showing apostles in problematic light? Like, don't they show Holland giving the musket talk? Like, isn't that brilliant? They're basically showing bad examples of apostles saying cringy bad things. That in and of itself is revolutionary.
Why is he doing this? Why is the producer, his name was Robert Reynolds. Why is he doing that? Why is he he's doing what Bill or I would do on a Mormonism Live, and we're picking like the most cringy examples of things that LDS apostles have said, and he's putting them right in his documentary.
He's trying to get people to have a healthier view of church leadership.
I think because it's the reality of what in some respects, like I totally see, I think the point that Jim and John have made repeatedly, which is the church isn't just the leaders. But I don't think if anyone ever says, well, you can't really take what the leaders say about Mormonism as representative of Mormonism, I think that's patently ridiculous. But there is some truth to the reality, and we know this from watching the church's history, especially on race and the priesthood. The church is full of factions that are trying to pull the church in different directions. I think that's just a reality. And personally, I would much rather it pull in this direction that actually deals with the reality of what those men have said and done. And even if I might not be able to overlook those things, I can understand why some people still find value in it despite what those people have said and can even use it. Like there are traditions that take Abraham's sacrifice as a mistake. And I think that this documentary can be viewed as trying to do that with modern day church leaders.
Bill?
Patrick Mason is talking about this in like the nebulous so you have just ordinary members of a ward debating. One wants to chop off someone's head and one doesn't. It's an absurd extreme example with two people who have no stewardship or authority in the church.
Except it really happened with the Laffertys.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
But what Patrick's trying to get to is he's pointing at prophets and he's saying, are Lamanites the principal ancestors or aren't they? Are temple ordinances allowed to be altered or not? Are black people the sons of Cain with a curse or aren't they? Is the policy of exclusion from God or is the revelation to remove it from God? Is free agency a true thing that past leaders taught over and over again, or is free agency not real and now it's moral agency and representative agency? Is celestial marriage required as polygamy for exaltation, or isn't it? Is a woman's place in the home or not? The point is that even our leaders can't figure out what the truth is, So why do we, generation after generation, keep placing any level of trust in them that they can figure out the truth when they self-admit that they can't figure out the truth? Because from one generation of leaders to the next, they can't agree.
And at the same time, the head one, the president, will tell us that prophets will always teach you the truth. It's no wonder Mormons have so much prescription drug usage in Utah.
Yeah.
Let's go to the next clip if we can. We're almost getting done. Let's see, which one is this? Patrick Mason shows why prophets are not important. Now, obviously, that's not the point that he's trying to make here. Why are you, Jim? Jim, why are you laughing? I want to know right now, why are you laughing?
Well, it's just bizarre. I'm laughing because it did not occur to anybody in the production.
That's why you have me.
That's why we have you. I'm laughing because
Mormon exists in the world.
The idea. Let's get a clip where Patrick Mason shows why prophets are not important.
He's going to actually say what Bill just said, which is, I can figure this out on myself. But man, those prophets are really good. Okay. Play this and see if that's not exactly the subtext of what he's saying.
Okay.
There. For me, the tension between the individuality of personal revelation and active participation in a big, sometimes slow-moving institution is a tension, but it's a productive one. I don't always get it right, but I believe God trusts me to find the balance between what I hear in church with what I see around me in the world, to know the path that I should follow in trying to be a follower of Jesus in a really complex world. I can sit.
Yeah, Patrick can dress it up in as many highfalutin words as he wants, but it boils down to he just showed why prophets are not important.
I don't think he said that at all. I don't see any way to torture what he said to mean that.
Oh, really?
I'm gonna switch teams on this one and join Bill and RFM.
No, wait, so you're going to join who? Bill and who?
Bill and RFM.
You're with me?
On my team,
okay, hang on a second then, but Colby,
yes,
you've made a wise choice. But let's go ahead and let's see what Jim Bennett and John DeLynn have to say first. And then we'll let you guys.
John, are you on my team on this or no?
Oh, I do not think he said what RFM said at all.
He has been on your team all night long. I want to know what happened before the show between you guys.
You didn't read.
Go ahead, Jim. You tell us what you think about it, and then I want to hear from John. I want to hear your points of view, and I won't interrupt you.
He's talking about the importance and the value of the tension, not that one is not important or one is more important than the other. That the kind of tension that comes with sustaining a prophet who we sustain not because they are perfect, but precisely because they are not, that there is value in that tension, which I think is very different from prophets are not important.
Well, I'm going to leave aside what I consider to be your torturing of the definition of the word sustain, and let's go to John DeLynn.
Oh, I want to come back to that someday, but
that's horrible what you've done to that poor word.
I think Patrick's saying leaders do their best. They have wisdom. They say good and bad things. People get it right and wrong sometimes. And the part of the value of being in a church is that, at the end of the day, you've got to use your best judgment and navigate when you're going to say, yep, I like the leaders, or I like what the church is saying in this instance, or nope, in this instance, this isn't working for me. I'm going to do my own thing or think my own way. And he's saying that's a healthy, normal, constructive thing. And I think that's true in school. I think that's true in government. I think that's true in life, in marriage, in everything. Is wise people take other people's feedback into consideration and then also do their own thinking and find a good synthesis.
Yeah, but we're going to see what Colby has to say about that. Because really, what you've said, I think you're accurately conveying what it is that Patrick Mason is saying. But the fact is that you could say that about any freaking church that has a pastor.
You're taking my points, RFM.
Oh, I'm sorry, Colby.
Patrick would agree. Patrick would agree.
Dan Dennett popularized this term known as deepities. He passed, I think, last year. And a deepity is basically a phrase. Dan Dennett's one of the four horsemen of the new atheist movement, right? And to him, a deepity is a statement that to the extent it's true, it's trivially true. And to the extent it's profound, it's false. And when I hear Mason say things like, well, the beauty is in the tension, you could say that of literally anything. Like I could construct an analogy about the tension between ordering different types of cheeseburgers and talk about how the beauty is actually in the tension. The real cheeseburger was the friends we made along the way, whatever you want to do. But this is my biggest issue with apologists like Mason and Givens, is I don't feel like it's unintentional how vague the things they're actually saying are. And the fact that their apologetics could be used as a defense for, and I think John actually made the point very well, saying what he's saying you could apply to schools, you could apply to governments. I think that's then when we have to come back to, but what was the original claim? Was the original claim of the church that this is just a community you're going to be a part of like any other normal secular organization? Maybe people understood it that way. That wasn't the way I understood it. So that's where I fall on this particular one. I think what he said sounded very much like a deepity to me because it really had no substance. You could apply the same statement to literally any situation.
What is the word deepity?
Deepity.
How do you spell that?
Like the word deep, D-E-E-P. You're going to make me spell out loud, which I'm really bad at. I'm smart in other ways.
I won the 7th grade district-wide spelling bee of the Las Virgenes School District.
The Las what school district?
Las Virgenes. It means the virgins. When I was on the debate team in the Las Virgenes School District, we would drive through downtown Los Angeles in a station wagon that said the Virgins in Spanish.
Here come the Fighting Virgins.
Congratulations on your Virgin Award, Jim.
Yes. The Sabine women. Bill.
Patrick Mason is advocating Patrick Mason's Mormonism here. Here's why I say this. Joseph Smith taught, again, we have this nebulous idea that, you can listen to the prophets and you can read good books and you can listen to non-members and then you can just make an educated decision based on Holy Ghost and your intelligence of what's the best decision to make. And Joseph Smith taught we can teach them good principles. I teach them good principles and I let them govern themselves. But the reality is, from the moment of Brigham Young to President Russell M. Nelson, you would be hard-pressed to find a moment where an LDS leader said, take what we say. I know we tell you we only teach the truth. We see around corners. Only the answers that mesh with our answers are good. But also, go find out for yourself. And if it's different, go do the different thing if the Holy Ghost has told you to do the different thing. And you would be hard-pressed. I could stop right now and there'd be this long pause waiting for one of you to find a reference from Brigham Young to the modern moment, because Mason is teaching something that LDS leaders from Brigham Young on, and also Joseph Smith when rubber meets the road. Orson, which one was it? Hiram Page and his fake seer stone, or was it?
It wasn't fake. Satan was really communicating with him through that.
That's my point. William McClellan trying to receive a revelation. Anytime someone got in the way doing actually what Joseph Smith said, and I teach them good principles and I let them govern themselves, Joseph put his foot down and he governed them, and they've been governed ever since. And Mason is advocating for a way to live Mormonism that is not in Mormon theology at all.
That's what makes it radical. That's what makes this documentary valuable. Is literally no. Patrick Mason is saying, "Hey, Mormons out there, don't be an Orthodox Mormon."
He didn't say that.
It's apostasy.
He is saying that.
He's telling you to be an apostate.
He is left to appear to everyone who's not a Mormon as the Mormon orthodoxy.
This documentary is telling people the leaders are fallible. The Book of Mormon is problematic as a historical document. The church has not been healthy to LGBT people. Don't follow the prophet blindly. The epistemology of personal inspiration is unreliable, and find your own way in this church.
John, is Patrick Mason in apostasy here?
If he is,
I think the project will be viewed as something that's in apostasy by some of the brethren.
If Patrick Mason is in apostasy, then Patrick Mason will be dealt with by the people who deal with apostasy. The fact that Patrick Mason, as we all recognize, is not going to be dealt with suggests that there is more room for a diversity of opinion within the church than I think most people realize.
Show me one leader who's taught that. Besides the quote I gave you from Joseph Smith, give me one example if this is true.
Well, I don't have...
I think the church is happy to have their neo-apologists go out there and misrepresent what the church believes in order to keep people in.
It's not misrepresent, it's teach a different way.
Look,
Model a different way.
The flip side to the idea that there is more room for diversity of opinion in the church is that there is less room for direct criticism of leaders than people realize. I would get in more trouble. I wouldn't get in trouble if I, speculated about Heavenly Mother than if I started saying that an apostle wears ugly ties. I mean, the minute I start attacking an individual leader, the church has absolutely no patience for that. But the church, I think, has far more patience for a diversity of opinion than people realize.
I also think there are a lot of quotes that would cut against what you're saying, Bill. Like even Doctrine and Covenants 93, the glory of God is intelligence. Intelligence is independent in the sphere in which God has
I'm
placed it.
saying an LDS leader standing at a pulpit or teaching you in a correlated manual that when your gut or the Holy Ghost tells you to do something counter to what we, the leaders, teach you, you have a right and responsibility to do what's best for you and to be able to do so faithfully. Doesn't exist.
The only possible exception is Elder Oaks in the conference talk, and it was conference, when he says that we teach general principles and it's up to you to receive the revelation to figure out if there's any exceptions that apply to you. But then he gave away the fact that he was lying when he said that, and that was all a snow job. When he had the youth conference that Bill was referring to earlier, when he's telling the story about a young woman who came to him about her parents who had received revelation that they don't need to pay tithing anymore. In other words, they did exactly what he was advocating in general conference that they do. And when it happened, he said, well, I'm not going to say they didn't receive revelation. I'm just saying it didn't come from the right source. And everybody laughed.
To go further on that, Oakes's comments at the B1 celebration are so revealing, and that he says that as he studied the reasons given for the priesthood ban, he could feel confirmation of the truth of none of them, which means that he did not feel those things were true. And then he still says, and continues on and says, but I determined to be whatever it was, like loyal to our prophetic leaders and follow them. And so, okay, I'm swinging back to supporting Bill on this.
I think he said obsequious. I determined to be obsequious and a toady. That's what he said.
Can I respond to Bill?
Okay.
So, Bill, your premise seems to be that unless one or all general authorities say it in general conference, that either they don't like it or it doesn't exist or it's not approved. Let me tell you a quick story. Is that not what your premise is?
Let me say it this way, and I'll be quick and you can then come in. Neil Anderson taught that doctrine is defined by that which all leaders teach consistently. And the one thing in Mormonism that has been taught consistently is that you obey what we say. And if you run counter to that, you are not in good standing. They have never given you permission to do something different other than what they have told you to do. And they have constantly reinforced that.
Okay. I'll tell the story really quickly. I had 2 lunches with Elder Holland, and there's 2 stories that come to mind from my lunches with Elder Holland. The first is I asked him point blank in our first lunch whether he wanted people like me in the church. And this was around 2009, 2010. And he said, absolutely, we want 100,000 Joel and John DeLynns in this church. But he also said, I'm not going to lie to you. The closer you are to the brethren, I believe the more benefit you're going to get from the church. But we want a big tent, and I don't care if half of your rear end is sticking out of the tent, as long as you're willing to listen to the brethren and at least consider what we have to say. We want you in this church.
As long as you're completely in the tent, I don't care if you're outside the tent.
That's not what he said at all.
I'm sorry, I'm hearing it very different then. Go ahead.
Fine. The second thing is in my second interview with Elder Holland, I said, Elder Holland, why can't one of the brethren get up in general conference and say, yes, Elder Holland paid for lunch. I asked Elder Holland why he couldn't give a general conference talk believing members of a mixed faith marriage that you should never leave your spouse if they lose their faith. That a loss of faith is not grounds for leaving your husband or spouse. He said, you should tell people that. And I said, and he said, I give you permission to tell people that. And I said, yeah, but that's not, is this worth even responding to?
No, it's just
No.
someone's being funny, and I thought it was funny. No,
Okay. Well, if I'm boring you guys, let me know.
No. Finish the story.
He said, you say it. I give you permission to say it. And then I said, but Elder Holland, it's not going to have the same effect if I say it than if one of you says it in general conference. And what he said was, maybe someday when the church is a little more mature, I'll be able to say something like that. In other words, there are things that we can't say over the pulpit that we still are okay with them being said.
Because
And
it's the
that's
members'
what I
fault
think-
again.
That's what
We're
I
not
think.
mature enough.
What?
It's the members' fault again. We are the ones who
no.
are too
I
immature.
think what they're saying is this doesn't work. Like the part of how I define a prophet is somebody who keeps the movement going and helps make it succeed across generations. And I just don't think you lead a successful movement by undermining your own authority. So I think they can both have space for people like Patrick Mason and the progressive Mormons and say, we'll allow them to exist. We'll even quietly support them and we'll quietly fund them. And we'll allow them to say these things and not excommunicate them. But we're never going to say it over the pulpit ourselves, because then.
Well, that's the point that Bill was making, right?
But that doesn't mean that they're against it or that it's not something they allow or condone.
It's about what the members, if you're the average member in any ward in the church, that's the meaning you take. No leader has ever given you permission to run counter to what they teach or what they say or what they want you to do. We're encouraged to be homophobic because they're homophobic. We're encouraged to look down upon people who leave the church because they taught us to look down upon people who leave the church. We have no permission. Jim Bennett goes outside the realm of what LDS leaders have publicly taught to be as kind and soft and as inclusive to apostates as he is, because the leaders of the church have not advocated that position. Elder Holland saying something to you over a private lunch is meaningless to the 4 million people who attend church every Sunday.
But is it meaningless that they allow the Restore conference to happen every year where 5,000 or 6,000 people all get together and basically have Patrick Mason and Terrell and Fiona Givens and all the rest as their own personal progressive Mormon apostles? They allow it. They support it. They endorse it in a sense.
Well,
and that means something, even if they don't say all those things in general conference. It's still meaningful that they allow it to exist and support it behind the scenes.
Can we
But
get Jim to say something and then you can respond, Bill
Uh,
and Colby? Go ahead, Jim.
Colby to say something?
Jim, please.
Oh, well, I think the lesson, Bill, here is not that Jim Bennett is going outside the boundaries of what the brethren find acceptable. It's that Patrick Mason and Jim Bennett or whoever else who are saying things like this and not encountering any kind of pushback from the brethren suggests that the brethren find it acceptable. They find it to be within the boundaries of what's acceptable in the church. If you want me to give you a quote, and I say, don't look at what they say so much as what they're doing. And one of the things, going back to this documentary, at one point, Robert took it. I was not part of this meeting, but Robert took it to the powers that be at Deseret Book and showed an early cut of it to Deseret Book. And the reaction they got was, we love this. We want to support this any way we possibly can. And we can't have our fingerprints on this at all because it will damage what you're trying to do. The reaction that we've gotten we have not gotten any kind of pushback or negative response from the institutional church over this. And all the reactions we've gotten have been positive, suggesting that they see this as being within the boundaries of what is acceptable discourse or acceptable positions within the church. So if you want to start quoting me, well, they've said this and they've said this and they've said this, I think you have to look at what they're doing to show that they interpret what you've said as being something that includes something like this within its boundaries.
Yes, and I hear you saying that Deseret Book says we'll do anything we can to support it, except we're not going to have anything to do with it.
No, well, I mean, but the reason, I mean, we didn't want them to have anything to do with it. I mean,
So you were just showing it to them so they knew about it?
Well, that's part of it, but we wanted to get some of their feedback on it. We want to, this is a conversation that I think needs to be had by everybody. It's not a conversation we're trying to hide from the institutional church. We weren't trying to do this in a corner. We weren't trying to do this under Deseret. It's like, this is what we are doing.
Right,
And
but you went to Deseret Book.
all along, every kind of interaction we've had with the institutional church has been, we love this, keep going. It's wonderful.
By that same logic, though, as far as the church making room for this conversation in the church, like in the broader tent of the church, as far as I know, they haven't taken any steps against like significant DesNat figures. So I guess I'm struggling to understand, is that, are we basically then just saying, it seems to me
That's
that
okay.
the brethren, I guess I'm going to put a point on this and say, it seems to me that the brethren have abdicated their role in actually leading this church. And I think a consequence of this is the fact that they are just way too old. And I've spoken to people who've done internships with the church's public relations department and other areas inside of the church. And one of the things that I was really surprised when they talked to me, you guys all have more access to insiders than me, but the one thing that surprised me when I was talking to someone who did an internship for the PR department was they explained to me that they had prepped some report that was going to go to an apostle, and it was about membership numbers. And the news wasn't necessarily favorable. And the supervisor that this intern had told them that they needed to give it several more passes to find a silver lining in the way they were communicating this to the brethren. Now, I want to be realistic and say, like, as someone who's worked for multiple public agencies, every business and every organization does this to a certain extent. I think that's then when we just come back to like the initial claim, which is like, are we holding the church to the standard the church inculcated in us to expect it to meet? Or are we holding it to the standard that we would apply to like literally any other organization? And I think that's where I can see both views of it. For me, I hold them to the claim that I understood from the time that I prayed about the Book of Mormon when I was a kid. Oh, that's my mom. Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Mom.
Hey,
You have a wonderful son.
you do indeed.
There's a difference. What you guys are saying is because they allow or permit something to happen without going after it, that is showing the church-wide people that it's approved. And as Kobe just pointed out, that by that standard, DesNat and other unhealthy factions of Mormonism would be seen as being approved. That's not real. What's real is what they
word though.
Allowed.
Is
what's real is what they endorse and what they advocate. And it doesn't matter in a private lunch with John Dehlin. It matters what is said in correlated places such as Conference, First Presidency Letters, Ensign Magazine, whatever it is, those things. It is not, you can't make an argument that because they don't come after somebody for something, that means that that's a welcomed thing within the tent of Mormonism.
Allowed. We're saying allowed.
Why is permitted different than allow?
No, you said endorsed initially. Endorsed means they absolutely approve.
I think what Bill is saying is that his impression of what you were saying was that something that's permitted is approved. And I was kind of getting that vibe too, though I understand you're modifying that now, correct? You're not saying that just because the church permits something.
I'm saying that what Jim and John are saying is that if the church allows it to happen unchecked, if they permit it to happen unchecked, it has some sort of approval. And that's just not real, because then you have to agree that DesNat has the church's approval.
I do agree.
I do agree as well. And I think it's problematic. I would really love the church to set the boundary much more clearly on DesNet. I'd really love to see the church set the boundary much more clearly
There's a lot of confusion
on
on preppers and on visions of glory people like Chad and Lori.
Yeah.
Can you see how allowing or permitting something to happen unchecked without endorsing or advocating it creates the very confusion that you guys are saying there's no confusion? It's
nobody's saying there's no confusion. I didn't say
Hanson is saying there's a lot of confusion.
A lot of
when did Jim and I say there's no confusion?
Because you're saying on one hand something has their approval. When I'm saying
we haven't ever said that.
There's a lot of confusion on whether it has approval or
they
not.
approve it. They allow it.
It's acceptable. The brethren, in my estimation, what the brethren do is set boundaries. And that there are a number of things acceptable within those boundaries that they may or may not approve of or agree with. But once you cross the boundary, then they'll take action. And so far, those boundaries do include DesNat and anti-vaxxers, and a lot of people who I feel, if I were president of the church, have crossed the kinds of boundaries that I think represent what would be acceptable in the church. I mean, I'm not trying to say, and part of the problem, I think, Bill, you're highlighting a reality that sometimes those boundaries are really fuzzy.
Intentionally. They don't want the average member to know where the lines exactly are.
Well, I'm not quite that cynical, but I do think sometimes maybe they don't even know where the lines exactly are. I mean, I think when Elder Holland, when John asked Elder Holland, why don't you give this talk in conference? It may well be that Elder Holland had not even considered that idea before. I'm not trying to say that it's a perfect system or that there aren't problems here, but I am trying to say that the idea that because you can find quotes that you interpret to mean that Patrick Mason is in apostasy, that Patrick Mason therefore is in apostasy or is out of the bounds, I think you have to look at what the brethren do in terms of enforcing those boundaries. And I think Patrick Mason very clearly is safely within those bounds with the things that he's saying here.
Even though what he's saying contradicts what the prophets have said.
Is it because of the ending of what he says, though, Jim? Just so I can better understand your position, because I could say the exact same things as Patrick Mason up to a certain line. And then it seems like, and this is honestly my biggest issue with those more nuanced apologists, is it seems like they basically give you a lot of good reasons not to believe in or associate with the church. But then the end of the sentence is, but I still find a way to believe anyways. And it feels like, I guess I can agree with part of it, and then I just don't agree with the conclusion. So it seems to me like the conclusion is ultimately the most important part. In other words, like paying, whatever you want to call it, basically making yourself part of the system by surrendering to the authority. Maybe that's too cynical, but is that the difference? What makes someone like John DeLynn or Bill or me or RFM on the other side of the line from Patrick Mason on the question of
it's wrong to criticize leaders of the church, even if the criticism is true?
I mean, that principle is strictly enforced. And I think that's kind of part of where the line is. I think I can answer that question with a story, actually, because my first foray into talking to all of you evil apostates was when Bill Reel called me on the phone and said, I'd love to have you on my podcast. And 14 hours later, we had this long discussion. And I got a call from a guy in my ward and who said, he says, I've never told you this, but I don't believe in the church, and I go to church for whatever reason. And he says, and I'm a big Bill Reel fan, and I listened to all 14 hours, and I want you to know you're in big trouble. And I went, I'm in big trouble. Why? And he goes, oh, the brethren don't want to hear the things you were saying. They don't want to hear that they're fallible. They don't want to hear that they've made mistakes. And I'm just warning you that you're gonna probably hear from somebody. You're gonna be in big trouble. And so I kind of wanted to nip the whole thing in the bud And I called a guy in my stake presidency who used to be my bishop, and I served as his second counselor, so I know him very well. And I said, Chris, this is what I've done. And I've had these 14 hours of conversations, and I'm told I'm probably in big trouble. And I just want to, and he laughed. And he said, Jim, you were defending the church. We don't go after people who are defending the church, even if they're doing it badly. Where you get in trouble is when you go on the attack. And that has actually, I've held on to that ever since then. That was what, Bill, 6 years ago-ish? I've held on to, it was actually that conversation with Bill that led to Robert Reynolds seeking me out.
Mm-hmm.
And
so Bill kind of discovered you, didn't he, Jim?
Yeah. So
it sounds like it is then the conclusion, right? It's about the where the dividing line is between apostasy and not apostasy is the conclusion. Is that fair?
The conclusion is, so if you say all those things and then just leave it out there, I think that there are leaders who will interpret that as an attack. I wouldn't be one of them if I were one of these leaders. I'm not one of these leaders. I don't think I ever will be. But the fact that Patrick Mason says something and then says, but I still find a way to stay and I'm still in, is a sign I'm not attacking. I'm not going after you. I sustain you. This gets back to, my tortured idea of sustain. I very much do not believe sustain and agree have anything to do with each other.
Sure.
I don't think sustaining leaders means agreeing with them. I have made no secret of the fact that I think the idea that Mormon is ever a victory for Satan, or that it's terrible to use the Mormon nickname, that just strikes me as absolutely ridiculous. I'm very much a Gordon B. Hinckley guy in that regard. But I sustain President Nelson, and I recognize his authority, and so I try to demonstrate that by avoiding using the term Mormon, even though I disagree with that.
I think you said it was ridiculous.
I absolutely think it's ridiculous. But I don't think the brethren will interpret me saying that as an attack, because I come back and say, look, inherent in the word sustain is an acknowledgement of weakness. We never talk about sustaining Jesus Christ. We don't sustain him as our Savior. He does not require our sustenance. He is divine. We worship Jesus. We sustain leaders because leaders can fall down, and so we have to sustain them. We have to lift them up. And I think it's a greater act of faith to sustain a leader you don't agree with than a leader you do agree with. And I think the red line that most of the brethren adopt, and again, it is leadership roulette. There's no question about that. But I think the bright red line is whenever you are perceived to go on the attack. And this is a preview for Friday, but that's one of the things that I thought was so frustrating about Jacob Hansen, was he kept attacking the church and saying he was defending the church in the process. And I think that becomes a problem. That becomes problematic, regardless of why you're attacking them. So
can I just say that I think sustaining means I'll do what you want me to do, dear Lord. I'll go where you want me to go. That's what sustain means, just to put it out there, because I think that's really clear. That's what it means within the Mormon context. I understand that you've come up with a different interpretation of sustain.
I don't know how that's wildly different from what I've just said.
I think that's what he was saying.
That's exactly what he said.
He was basically saying the same thing that Dallin Oaks said.
No, he said he tries to not say Mormon as much out of deference to. And that's the sustaining. That's doing what you're supposed to do.
I agree, Arfin.
Anyway, I hope everybody's having as good a time as I am. I hope there's no hurt feelings out there.
Just so you know.
Okay, because I think that we're having a great time. I think the audience is loving it.
Moment of truth.
Yes, it is time for Jim Bennett to assume the position. Grab your ankles and face west, as my dad used to tell me before he'd whip off his belt and give me a little comeuppance. This is Jim Bennett on the name Nahum, or Nahum, or Nehmm, however you want to spell it. It's a great evidence for the Book of Mormon. And Jim, I'm going to let you make the first comment, even before I say anything. You're going to make the first comment after we play this clip, okay? It's just about Nahum. You've had a chance to look at it, right? We're not blindsiding you. We're not blindsiding you, right? Okay.
Because there are things in the Book of Mormon that can't be easily explained away. There's an ancient burial site that's mentioned in First Nephi called Nahom that wasn't known when the Book of Mormon was published, and yet has since been discovered exactly where the Book of Mormon said it would be.
Exactly, Jim?
Sure.
That's all you want to say about it? This is your chance before sentencing.
I don't know. So if you watch that, first of all, that segment is the most recent footage filmed in the entire documentary.
When was it filmed?
Less than a year ago.
Well, you know, Nahum hasn't moved its location, though, in the interim.
No, it has. It has. It's
It
quiet.
moved over 100 miles to be exactly where the Book of Mormon says it should be?
I don't know.
Okay.
So is your issue that my use of the word exactly?
Well, do you think that what you said, are you willing to stand by what you said as you said it right now?
Yeah.
Okay, Colby, go at him.
Okay.
Colby and I talked about this at some length when we were dissecting and vivisecting Austin Fife's Light on Truth letter. And he made a few slides, and I actually learned a few things about Nahum myself, because it was always kind of squishy on the issue, and this brought it into clarity. And I think Colby is just going to share a few things with you here.
Really quick, I have to run, so I'm just going to say I love you guys. I think Nahum is a super dumb apologetic, but I love Jim Bennett, and I love that you guys let me be on the show.
Right back at you, John. You're
I have to run.
John, what about chiasmus?
Also super dumb. If it's good for Dr. Seuss, it's good for Joseph Smith.
Well, we're not going to play the clip where they talk about chiasmus, just about Nahum.
No.
So we're just going to end here.
John,
thank you so much for joining us. You're a peach.
Thank you. I love you guys. And I just want to say Bob Reynolds, Robert Reynolds, and all those associated with this film were courageous. And this is gonna do good things for many people in the church. And I'm grateful that they did it. And I'm grateful for y'all for covering it. And I love you guys. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. See you later.
Okay, see you guys.
It's going to move a lot of people closer to leaving the church, is what I think, but we'll see.
It might do that. It
Are
might
you
do
still
that.
here, John?
I'm leaving, but I agree. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm not saying that's good.
Colby, the school gym.
Bye, guys. Love you guys.
Bye, John.
I'm not gonna school Jim.
Take him out behind the woodshed, Colby.
as hard as you can.
No, can we pull up the end
Let me
of the
see the
slides after
slides.
that clip?
Sure.
Let's see here. Oh, hang on a second here. Thank you, Bill.
Okay.
There it is.
Yeah, go back one slide. Okay. So correct me here where I'm wrong. So this is the works on Nahum when it started from S. Kent Brown and Warren Ashton. So they were the folks that discovered this. And I think this apologetic all traces back to this 1999 article. That's probably where you're getting your information to. Yeah.
Well, if you watch the entire clip of me
Sure.
in there, I'm getting my information secondhand from Bob Bennett.
Yes.
My father wrote a book called Leap of Faith, Confronting the Origins of the Book of Mormon. And pretty much everything I have to say on the subject is warmed over Bob Bennett. So it's second or third hand likely. I don't know if he got this directly from primary sources.
That's cool. And so just so everyone knows, I did ask Jim about doing this before this episode. I'm not springing this on him.
You're not at all.
Go to the next slide for me. So these are the actual, and these are slides that RFM and I put together in our Light and Truth response series. This is like the next big apologetic, after your CS letter response, Jim. I think it's the only one I've really seen that's been popular since yours, which I did read all 400 pages of it, by the way. So these are the actual altars. If you'll skip forward one more, Bill. So you asked if RFM had issues with the exactly. My first issue actually would be with the claim that it was a burial site. So this site actually is the Baran Temple. It's a Sheban, that's how you say it, like the Sheban Empire, a Sheban temple in Yemen. And it's known as the Throne of Bilquis. It dates back to the 10th century BCE and was dedicated to the god Al-Maqwa. So what you see here is the actual temple site where these altars are found. There are 3 altars with the Nahum inscription on them, NHM. And we'll look at the inscription here in a second. But you also have these extensive archives, and that's caused archaeologists to basically say this was the seat of power of this Sheban state during this time period, and they inscribed everything on the walls. Can you go forward one more? So first,
No, sorry.
I guess
I got it, Bill.
I don't know that it's a burial site. I know that there are altars, and I think the apologetic spin since then has been that it's a burial site, but I don't see where it's a burial site. And Jim, you don't have to feel the need to answer any of this. If you want to look into more of it and we can talk about it some other way, that's completely fine. The other thing I think that often makes this a much more impressive piece of evidence when like spun apologetically is the actual inscriptions. So like this is the full inscription on each of these three altars, according to S. Camp Brown. So we've got these three altars. They do have NHM on them, but they have all of these other letters. And in fact, if you read the translation, right, we've got Beathar, son of Sadum, son of Nahum, the Nehemite. This phrase, Nehemite, to me, using that on the altar that it was dedicated, or I'm sorry, it was dedicated by this person or donated by this person to the temple, suggests that that's not the site of NHM anyways. No one in Boise calls me Colby the Boisean. No one in Sandy is going to call you Jim Bennett. I don't know what you call people from Sandy. I don't know. But did you know there's like a full, like 4 lines of text on here aside from NHM?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
It looks like HMY. The Y is the it part. Is that right?
It must be. And did you know it's not in Hebrew? This is in South Arabic. It's in a different language.
No,
Okay.
again, it's all warmed over Bob Bennett.
Yeah. Can you go forward one more? Because this is kind of the summary. And I feel bad that I'm like I'm not expecting you to have an answer to this. It's
This is my favorite part of the whole show.
When I hear truth claims and I hear specific pieces of evidence, this is the way my brain thinks, right? My undergrad degree is in micromolecular biology. I then went to law school. I'm sorry, I can't help it. I'm a very literal person. But here's my view of what you have to ignore if you count Nahum as a hit, right? You have to ignore that it's a temple, not a burial site, dedicated to a moon sun god from an ancient, different religion. It's a temple that involved religious practices, again, of an entirely different religion. The temple construction dates to 1000 BC, not really the 600 BC we'd be looking at for Lehi and the burial of Ishmael. I suppose you can say, well, it was already there. But again, this is a temple, not necessarily a burial site. Then when you look at like the actual hits, right? We're looking at 3 hits NHM versus like there's 63 consonants in the actual inscription. So that to me already goes like, how significant is that hit, right? It's also talking about, it's not talking about a place at all. It's talking about a tribe name of an individual who donated the altars. It's in a different language, as we already talked about. Hebrew and South Arabic don't use vowels. So you're already inflating the number of hits, right? Because you have less numbers. So you're going to have a higher percentage of hits. And there's 3 books in the Bible that would have the same series of consonants. So I think my question was, after way too much lead in, is just like, I don't understand, as far as I understand the evidence, and this is coming right from the apologetic websites that RFM and I generated this from. It was Evidence Central, I think, is where we got all of this and those articles.
Scripture Central?
Yeah, Scripture Central. Sometimes they go by like Evidence Central. I guess when I look at this, I just don't see a very impressive piece of evidence, but I don't want to be uncharitable. I just want to say, like, what am I missing? This doesn't seem like, and RFM in the episode also talks about how it's 100 miles inland versus if you actually follow the narrative in the Book of Mormon, right? Nahum is the place where they turn east. And before that, they're supposed to be in the borders of the Red Sea, like by the sea, not 100 miles inland. So I guess my overall question, and you can punt on this, is like, why is this impressive as evidence for a historical Book of Mormon?
Well, I'm going to punt somewhat in that.
That's okay.
I have already conceded that I'm passing along an argument from my father that I have not consulted the primary sources for. And I have no reason to doubt that this is an accurate representation of what those primary sources say. That said, just looking at it, for instance, temple construction dates to 1000 BC, as if that is somehow disqualifying of Nahum being some kind of evidence, because the Book of Mormon took place in 600 BC. Well, the passage talks about they came to a place that was called Nahum, which means that it would have been called Nahum under this for 400 years prior to them getting there. The idea, for instance, that the inscription is made in South Arabian, not Hebrew. I'm not aware of anything in the Book of Mormon that says that this was a Hebrew inscription. The only reference to it is that it was called Nahum, and we know that Lehi talked about being schooled in the language of the Egyptians as well as the language of the Jews. So as I look at all of this, I don't see anything in here that screams. I am not equipped to sit here and defend point by point something that I have not studied extensively and that I only really have a cursory knowledge of.
I have a separate question from a different angle. I'm going to put something up on the screen here and just. Isn't it just as much of a bullseye coincidence that Joseph, having familiarity with Captain Kidd, could have gotten the words? In other words, isn't Moroni Comoros, because it's two words that have a deep similarity to a Mormon narrative, whereas the other one's three letters in the right place, sort of. Aren't both of these sort of the same kind of hits? And yet this kind of hit gets dismissed by believers out of hand. Meanwhile, we cling to three consonants in a general region that probably doesn't exactly equal what we say it does.
Now we're getting into the weeds of something that I'm happy to get into the weeds here at the end. This is something that's actually an issue I went in extensively into in my CES letter reply, and I think our Bill, you and I had lengthy discussions on that. I don't know if we actually did have discussions on that point, but if we're now going to go down the rabbit hole of Book of Mormon historicity,
I'm not trying to put you in that place, Jim. I think really the reason I wanted to have this discussion with you, and we can talk about it another time and even offline, is there's this quote from Carl Sagan that his daughter put into her book called For Small Creatures Such as We. It's about finding like ritual and meaning from a secular lens, from a scientific lens. And she has this quote at the beginning of the book where she says that her father told her, "It is dangerous to believe things because we wish them to be true." And I think sometimes what I see with these apologetic hits, and I get you're working from your father's research and the story that you'd heard, but I think when I hear about Nahum and I then go look at an actual apologetic website that's like saying these are the actual facts, I think I get concerned for the methodology. That's like, it feels like believers in a historical Book of Mormon are sometimes so desperate for any type of evidence that's even consistent with that worldview that they will run to pieces of evidence like Nahum or like the fraudulent gold plates that were discovered last year that like every archaeologist knows is false, or the Bat Creek stone, or whatever you want to go to. I feel like when we actually look at and we engage in the same type of like epistemological rigor that we would in literally any other field, anytime I've looked at any of these pieces of evidence, they just are never that impressive to me. And maybe I'm too skeptical. I fully own that I take this stuff probably too literally. But I guess that's the reason I wanted to bring it up, not to confront you with it, not to play gotcha, just to say like, what if the church were true? I would want to know. If the Book of Mormon were historical, I would want to know. So when people claim that there are pieces of evidence that can't be explained away, I think that's the phrase you use. And I get that.
Easily explained away is the phrase.
What's that?
The phrase I used was easily explained away. Not that it can't be explained away, and not that I think people can look at that and reach the same conclusion that you have. I don't think you've reached an irrational conclusion here. more and more, and maybe this is the punt. So here comes the punt. I'm setting it up. More and more, these kinds of discussions are completely uninteresting to me. When Jeremy Runnels wrote his debunking of my debunking, my first instinct was to go to his debunking and then start, debunking his debunking of my debunking. And I did that for about an hour. And I felt like I was reading the fine print on a mortgage loan.
Sure.
It was so reductive and just so, it's like, I just realized I don't really care that much about getting into the weeds because my faith in the Book of Mormon really doesn't have anything to do with Nahum one way or the other. And that becomes, it becomes this epistemological problem and everything else. But the way I described the Book of Mormon in the rest of that episode, give you a little background for why that's in there, is that Robert said, we don't talk about anything about a historical Book of Mormon. We don't have any footage of anybody making the apologetic arguments. And can you go in there? So this is scripted, I guess.
That's why it was the most recent part that was filmed.
That's why that's the most recent part that's filmed is we don't acknowledge the apologetic arguments. Would you be willing to go in and film and say this? And I said, sure. And so the other piece of inside baseball here, if you watch that clip, I filmed it with this phone that I've got.
It was like he had only the crappiest camera left.
Well, he had a really, really professional camera crew.
Yeah.
That did a lot of great work. But this was I filmed this myself, and I didn't realize I had all kinds of schmutz all over my shirt. It was I have psoriasis, and I had not taken my Tolts, and so I didn't realize until I shot it that there was just all this dandruff all over here. And so I said, can you guys please just zoom in on my face so that you don't see just how...
Oh, that's why. So we can't see your dandruff, even if we replay it.
You can't see my dandruff.
So that's why your face is so big in the...
Yes. Yeah. Well, I also have a very big head. But so that was there to kind of represent that argument. And it's not like I'm disavowing the argument so much as saying I don't really have that much interest in the argument because my faith in the Book of Mormon is not predicated. And my approach to Book of Mormon historicity, I think, it is very clear to me that whatever was on the golden plates, and I do believe there were golden plates. I do believe there was an angel Moroni. Terrell Givens makes that point. If there were no golden plates, if there was no angel Moroni, then it's all a fraud from the outset. And I think if I were to go there, I'd probably end up having to walk away from the church. But it is very clear to me that Joseph Smith was an active participant in whatever it is that happened as a result of that encounter.
Yeah.
And so whether it became a midrash of what's on the golden plates, I'm open to that idea. I'm open to Grant Hardy's sort of expansion theory of the Book of Mormon.
Oh, not Grant Hardy. Please don't hang that albatross on his neck.
Oh, who's
Blake Ostler?
Is that Blake Ostler?
Yeah.
Okay.
Grant Hardy is intelligent.
The thing I love most about Blake Ostler's theory is that it's nice and unfalsifiable. No,
well, sure. It is nice and unfalsifiable. And what I'm telling you is nice and unfalsifiable. And
but here's what I just came up with. Jim, here's what I came up with. And it's brilliant. Okay. You ready to hear this?
Sure.
I don't expect it to change your mind. But it occurred to me the other night in a flash of inspiration that if I were Joseph Smith and I really put myself in his shoes, and this is all real, and God has actually told me that I'm going to translate this ancient record written on gold plates, given to me by an angel by the gift and power of God, and I'm translating it, I can tell you one thing. The last thing I'm going to do is put anything of my own stuff into it.
Okay.
Who would do that? Nobody would do that.
I don't think
fried right on the spot.
No, I don't think that's how it works.
So Joseph Smith didn't know he was putting himself into it?
Essentially, yeah.
He didn't know he was writing his father's dream into First Nephi? I'm sorry. I'll stop.
Can I say one thing about this, which is
sure. Yes.
I wasn't trying to play gotcha with you on this conversation.
No, I mean, you told me well in advance you were going to do this.
But the other thing I want to praise you for is you are very honest about the reality of where faith fills in the gap for you. And that's one of the reasons I think that I consider you a friend, is that you can, and why I'm excited that you are involved in this project, is because we could look at those discrete pieces of evidence, like you said. A lot of times those arguments back and forth become uninteresting. But I think for people who really, really take the historicity claims seriously and literally, like I do, like that's the way I think. The other thing I'll say is, as not an official spokesman or anything, but as someone who does apologetics for the church sometimes, you have the courage of your convictions that like no one else in this space has. There are other apologists that actually accepted debates about the Book of Mormon historicity that are too chicken to follow through, and at least you're willing to sit here and entertain some of those questions, which I know I really appreciate, and I know the audience probably super appreciates too.
I think we should end this show on a note of appreciation for Jim. I agree. In fact, Jacob Hansen is such a chicken shit that we don't call chickens chicken shits anymore. We call them Jacob shits.
I've given Jim a hard time tonight, but I just want to point out his father's book. I've said this to you before, Jim. Your father's book had a big impact on me at a time where I was starting to delve into the messiness of Mormonism and beginning to wonder if the church was true. And what your dad did was he made the characters of the Book of Mormon three-dimensional. He made Nephi three-dimensional, and rather than being just a two-dimensional good and evil sort of characters in a book. And I still have this book on my shelf, by the way. And the comment I just put in the chat, I put it up on the screen here. Same thing that Kobe's saying. Kudos to Jim for being one of, if not the only believer who engages the critic in the modern moment. Again, Patrick Mason, Terrell Givens years ago, Bushman years ago, but you do it in real time in 2025, engages the critic and doesn't dismiss the critic's sincerity or their emotions. In other words, I come with some frustration. I'm frustrated at Mormonism. I'm not frustrated at Jim Bennett. I'm frustrated at Mormonism. And I'm frustrated at the position it puts us in. And you allow me to have a conversation with you where people will watch and go, Bill's frustrated. And most apologists would dismiss that out of hand. And what you say is to the audience is, no, we got to take people like Bill seriously because he is intellectually engaging this and being sincere to his own moral compass and integrity, as you said earlier. And we can't just dismiss people because they say it with some frustration in their voice. So thank you.
Well, I thank you for the kind words.
I highly recommend your dad's book, by the way, for a believer who's out there.
I read it.
Yeah, go read this book. It's great.
I recommend about 2/3 of it. There's about a third of it where, because he thought this was going to be published during Mitt Romney's campaign by a secular publisher. And so he thought it would be really fascinating to summarize the Book of Mormon at length. Oh. And I have never been able to get through those passages. It's like, yeah, I've read the Book of Mormon. I don't, but.
Is it more interesting when it's synopsized at length?
No, it's not. The thing that I find most interesting, and I've talked about this many times, is his Howard Hughes experiences and how he compares those to the Book of Mormon. Because there's nobody else talking about that. But the thing that, when I say I'm presenting Warmed over Bob Bennett, it's not just arguments on the Book of Mormon. I think one of the reasons why I situate where I do. Thank you. I am very proud of him, and that's where I'm going with this. One of the reasons I situate where I do is that I grew up in a household where these things were discussed with patience and with respect. And when I went through my God-makers induced faith crisis, I had a father that was willing to be patient with me and willing to sit with me and willing to live in that tension that we make fun of. But I think if I had had a different father, that I wouldn't be a member of the church anymore. Because now navigating these kinds of complexities and paradoxes and challenges an epistemological, I've already said paradoxes, but I'll say it again. Navigating this is something that I was sort of raised with. And I don't think many members of the church have that same privilege. The other person that I attribute this to is a guy named Howard Anderson, who was my uncle, who was the LA state president that I lived with when I went to USC. And we would have conversations about things like this all the time. And it was fascinating and it was fun. And if I came with a question or came with a problem, it wasn't, oh, you heretic, you disbeliever. It was, oh, this is something new to talk about. And you know, and I am hopeful to bring this all full circle. I'm hopeful that this documentary sort of shows that world does exist. There is a world where thoughtful people have confronted these issues and done so with integrity and come up with conclusions that, you know, if you want to take pot shots at Terrell Givens or Patrick Mason, that's fine. But the reality is, I just think this conversation, I think we're just at the beginning. I mean, John, before he left, he talked about the idea that we're a young religion. Judaism's had thousands of years, to the point where everything's been hashed out so much that there's all these different ideas, and there's a maturity to the Jewish faith that we just don't have yet. But I'd like to think that this documentary is a step in that direction. And I think that, you know, that we're all part of this conversation. And we've reached a point, and, you know, for forever, the institutional church particularly is like, well, Bill Reel and Radio Free Mormon and Colby Reddish are not part of this conversation. They're apostates. They're gone. They're out.
They love me.
Yes, they do love you. You're not out. You haven't been excommunicated. Look at you.
Run as fast as you can.
It's like a poor marksman. You keep missing the target. Hope everybody gets that reference. Con! Sorry. So
I anticipated that.
That you had to. But you are part of the conversation, and this conversation isn't going away. And we need to learn to talk to each other, and we need to learn to explore this together. And the church. One of the reasons why I'm not afraid of the church coming after me is that I've had enough conversations, and this will make Jacob Hansen furious. But I've had enough conversations with people on the inside to know that they know this conversation is necessary. I've had people say to me, you know, Jim, we love your podcast. I do a podcast with a guy who's left the church, and we interview people who have left the church, and they do not come out. Our podcasts don't end in a neat, tidy bow with Jim Bennett offering the perfect apologetic excuse, and it's all over. We've, you know, my wife has listened to some of them and said, you need to watch out because sometimes Ian sounds more faithful than you do. Mm-hmm. So I'm mindful of that. But I've had people on the inside say to me, we love your podcast.
Your podcast called Inside Out, by the way.
Inside Out, yes. And I said, well, how do you love my podcast? He says, because you're having conversations we're not allowed to have. I mean, there are so many people on the inside of the church. I'm not speaking for the brethren. I'm talking about all church employees, people in the PR department. I mean, all over the place. I've spoken to multiple folks, and it's like they know we need to have these conversations, and they know they can't really instigate these conversations. And so I think really genuinely behind the scenes, the church is welcoming this in a way that would surprise a lot of people. And I think that, you know, it's the growing pains that come with a faith trying to mature. And we're only 200 years old. And,
yes.
And we've got a ways to go.
We do. I'm sorry that there are people in the church employment who cannot have these conversations, and I'm glad you're modeling them. So much free agency, so little freedom to choose in this church.
Well, you're part of the conversation, and I appreciate your voice on that.
Jim, I love you. I love you so much. I'm going to invite you right here, right now, to join us on Mormonism After Dark on Friday. Will you be there? Yes or no?
I will be there.
Yes. Okay. And Kalabi, I want you there too. What do you say, pal?
Okay.
And we're going to have a very special guest star. It's going to blow your mind. I can't tell you who it is. I thought that person was going to be on tonight after the hour.
I know who it
made
is?
a big deal about it. Well, what?
You know.
I know. Oh, I do know who it is. Yes, I'm very excited.
I thought he was going to screw the pooch right here.
I'm not screwing any pooches.
Thank you so much, especially not on national TV. Okay. So we're going to have a special guest star along with Jim and Colby, and we are going to be dunking on our favorite Jacob shit, Jacob Hansen. Okay. Let's start it here. Okay. Any chicken you call it, just call him the Jacob shit. They'll know what you mean. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hope to see you Friday, 8:00 p.m. Mountain Time with our special guest and our wonderful, wonderful guests, Jim Bennett and Colby, to talk about sort of hate watch, kind of, after a manner of speaking.
We're not going to watch the whole thing, are we?
No, hell no.
Oh, okay.
It's tough enough to get through the first time. That's over 2 hours. Did you know that? There's only so many times they can watch you bring Jacob Hansen back to the freaking point.
We just have another 9 or 10 clips, Jim. It shouldn't take long.
Oh gosh,
We got more clips. You know, we didn't go through all the clips, and it was a wise move on your part. We can't even take any callers tonight. I hope nobody wanted to call in. I apologize. We're at the 3.5 hour mark, and I've got to go home because I'm going to be turning into a pumpkin here in a few seconds. But thank you so much. I think it was an exciting show, a wonderful show, but nowhere near as much fun as we're going to have on Friday night. Join us at Mormonism After Dark, won't you? And thanks for watching Mormonism Live. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. And please, if you haven't yet, go check out In and Out, the podcast.
Inside Out.
I knew it wasn't quite right.
In and Out is the burger.
Yes.
Inside Out is the Pixar movie and the podcast.
Thank you. Okay. So at least we know which side the lawsuit's going to be coming from. Okay, everybody. Good night. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks.